going to discuss the guidance note on CARO 2020. And as time and again it has been informed to all of you that for the financial year 2021-22, this CARO 2020 will be applicable, and therefore the current financial year, again the 21-22, which is going to end on March 31, 2022, uh, there are a lot of preparedness which is being required by the client as well as auditor firms. So it is important that these points related to CARO 2020 are being discussed in advance by us, and wherever there are implications, suitable discussions may be held with the respective clients wherever we shall be doing our interim audits before March 2022, as well as during the course of audit post March 2022. So today we have our speakers, Shreya Mangal and Purvika Jain. Both of them recently appeared in the CA final examinations. Many of the new articles may not be aware of this their introduction, so I am introducing them. That both of them have recently appeared in the CA final examinations, and basis their practical experience for last 2.5 years in the articleship training, as well as the various illustrative literature which has been given in the guidance note on CARO 2020. They have prepared their presentation, and I'm sure that both have prepared well. Before before they start on the topic, I would request them that while preparing the topic, particularly from the literature of the Institute of Guidance Note on uh, CARO 2020, have have both of them uh, learned anything from this literature, and what is the benefit which is been which is there after going through this guidance note on CARO 2020? Uh, Both of them can please explain it to the participants of today's class. All of our participants may come to know that what are the various benefits while referring to these various literature of the ICI. So over to you, Shreya and Purvika.
Thank you, sir, for such a warm welcome. While preparing this PPT, we went through guidance note with in depth. What we have studied while we were on examination leaves were nothing compared to this. Everything was in detail, and we get to know a lot of things.
And especially when we were preparing this PPT, we actually came to know that this the material which is provided by ICI has been given properly, and there is no need to refer any of the material available because you get every detail here. And I guess that's the best material we can refer to for studying the CARO 2020. Yes, sir.
Yes. Now you can proceed with your presentation.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. So today we'll be discussing about guidance notes on CARO 2020. So let's start while discussing about the applicability of the CARO 2020. So basically, it applies to all the companies, including foreign companies, except the given following. That is the banking company, insurance companies, Section 8 companies, one-person company, and a private company, provided with some conditions. There's a specific notification given where they have written that if a company converts into LLP or any other partnership firm, which is exempt from the application of this order, then this order will not be applicable. And this order will not be applicable to infrastructure investment trust and real estate investment trust. But however, the order will be applicable. Sorry. However, the order will be applicable to the companies in which these trusts have investment. If such companies satisfy the applicability criteria prescribed in the order, मतलब इन companies पे applicable नहीं होगा CARO 2020, पर अगर इन्होंने कहीं invest कर रखा होगा इन trust ने उन companies पे applicable होगा. So the definition of a small company is a small company means a company other than a public company which has a paid up share capital which does not exceed 50 lakh, which may be increased to 2 crores from effect from 1/4/21, but will not be exceed 10 crores rupees, and the turnover of which uh, of profit and loss account of the preceding financial year does not exceed 2 crores, which will be 20 crores with effect from 1/4/21. Provided that nothing in this clause shall apply to a holding company or a company under Section 8, any other body corporate governed by any other special act. Now discussing about a private company for whom this 2020 will not be applicable if they fulfill all these three conditions collectively. So the three conditions are the paid up share capital, reserve and surplus should not exceed 1 crore rupees, and the total borrowings does not exceed 1 crore rupees from any bank, and the total revenue should not exceed 10 crores rupees during the financial year as per the financial statements. So the point to here to be taken care is that you must satisfy all the three conditions mentioned above. If any of the one condition is not satisfied, then CARO 220 will be applicable on you, on a private company. So the applicability of consolidated financial statements, uh, except clause 21, all the other clauses will not apply to the consolidated financial statements. We'll be discussing clause 21 at the end of the PPT. And the auditor is not required to report on rest of the clauses of para 3 on the consolidated financial statements we're talking about. Now, this order was issued on 25th February 2020, and this order will be applicable from the audits of the financial year 21-22, which we will be doing this year. We'll be starting this year, the audits of these companies. Now, moving forward to the first clause of CARO 2020, the first clause is the same like CARO 16. The clause is whether the company is maintaining proper records showing full particulars, including quantitative details and situation of property, plant, and equipment. So basically, in this clause, the auditor has to comment on the whether the company is maintaining proper records showing full particulars, including quantitative details and situation of PPE. So when we talk about property, plant, and equipment, Index 16 specifies what is a PPE, which is PPE are tangible items that are held for use in the production or supply and are expected to be used for more than one period. There is a special notice to be taken care is that ROU assets are also considered for reporting under this clause, and investment property is also to be considered for reporting under this clause. For example, if a company has ROU assets or investment property, the auditor will be reporting under this clause for ROU assets and investment property along with PPE. Now, there's other records which you're required, the company is required to maintain. The first among them is you have to prepare a description of the PPE, the classification, a proper classification that whether it's a PBE, office equipment, etc. The situation of the property, plant, and equipment, original cost, of course, the quantity, the number of units we are having for each of the classification we are making. We usually ask the management to provide us a register, and if they don't provide us that, we can report under this clause uh, of the PP register.
Yeah. So basically, as and when we do audits, so there are various different types of the electronic records which are being maintained by the companies. So first of all, if we see the bigger companies who are basically having their own ERP and they are maintaining their all books of accounts on say SAP, Oracle, or any other ERP. So in such case, we need to actually see the entire system of that particular ERP. That and in these ERPs, there is a specific fixed assets registers which are being maintained by the client. तो आपको ये देखना होता है कि उस पूरे फिक्स्ड एसेट्स रजिस्टर में फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल जैसे इन्होंने बात करी रिगार्डिंग सिक्योरिटी एंड कंट्रोल की, तो आपको ये देखना होता है कि इस ईआरपी के अंदर जो भी रेलेवेंट सिक्योरिटी और कंट्रोल से रिलेटेड इश्यूज हैं, वेदर दोज आर बीइंग एड्रेस्ड बाय द ईआरपी सिस्टम और नॉट. तो आपको टेस्ट चेक करना होता है कि जब भी कभी भी कोई एडिशन हो रहा है, मान लीजिए बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स फिक्स्ड एसेट्स रजिस्टर में, तो वो एडिशन जो है वो फिक्स्ड एसेट्स रजिस्टर में भी प्रॉपर अकाउंट फॉर हो रहा है, नंबर 1. देन उसके ओपनिंग बैलेंसेस जो हैं वो प्रॉपर कैरी ऑन हो रहे हैं या नहीं हो रहे हैं. उससे रिलेटेड जितने भी जो फिक्स्ड एसेट्स रजिस्टर के अंदर जो भी कॉलम्स हैं, वो प्रॉपर्ली उन कॉलम्स में इंफॉर्मेशन जा रही है कि नहीं जा रही है, that at what place these fixed assets are being there with the company or the other columns also. तो ये सब आपको एक टेस्ट चेक बेसिस पे आपको सारी चीजें देखनी होती है. सिमिलरली जब भी एडिशंस हो रहे हैं तो उसका डेप्रिसिएशन जो है वो भी प्रॉपर्ली लग रहा है या नहीं लग रहा है इन दी प्रॉपर्टी प्लांट एंड इक्विपमेंट रजिस्टर. और उसकी डेप्रिसिएशन की जो पीपी में एंट्री आ रही है, पीपी रजिस्टर में, whether the similar entries or entries are being carried to the books of accounts or not. तो ये पूरा, this is only illustrative which I am explaining. You need to basically examine the entire flow in the fixed asset register in such ERP system. तो ये तो हो गया जहां बिगर कंपनीज ERP के साथ में फिक्स्ड एसेट रजिस्टर मेंटेन कर रही है. बट कुछ कंपनीज जो है वो फिक्स्ड एसेट रजिस्टर को टू बी कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव they maintain it with the in the Excel sheets. तो आपको ये देखना पड़ेगा कि भाई ये Excel sheet जो है वो जब कभी भी नया परचेज हो रहा है या एटलीस्ट एट द ईयर एंड पूरा का पूरा फिक्स्ड एसेट्स रजिस्टर इस एक्सेल शीट में अपडेट हो रहा है या नहीं हो रहा है, और कहीं ऐसा तो नहीं है कि वो एक्सेल शीट एक बार बनाई और फिर बाद में उसको कभी भी चेंज कर सकते हैं। तो वो एक्सेल शीट जैसा कि इन्होंने बताया कि प्रॉपर प्रिंटेड फॉर्म में वो आनी चाहिए या प्रॉपर ड्यूली साइंड बाय दी पर्सन्स जो भी कंपनी में है, वो उसको प्रॉपरली साइन करके और वो प्रॉपर रिकॉर्ड रख रहे हैं कि नहीं रख रहे हैं फॉर एवरी पीरियड फॉर विच वी आर ऑडिटिंग। तो ये सब चीजें आपको जहां कहीं पे भी इलेक्ट्रॉनिक फॉर्म में फिक्स्ड एसेट्स रजिस्टर मेंटेन हो, और जहां तक आज की डेट में जो सिनेरियो है वो 95% जो है 96% कंपनीज जो है वो इलेक्ट्रिक फॉर्म में ही PPE रजिस्टर रख रही है। So it is very important to examine all these flow with reference to the control and security measures regarding property, plant and equipment register. Yes, Reha, now you can continue.
Now, the first clause was about the tangible assets. We are supposed to maintain full particulars of the tangible asset. The clause B states about the intangible assets. Here also the company is supposed to maintain proper records showing full particulars of intangible assets. So Index 38 defines the term intangible asset as an identifiable non-monetary asset without physical substance. So while reporting under this clause, the auditor should consider the principles, accounting aspects, and disclosure requirements of intangible assets as specified in Index 38. The auditor, while reporting under this clause, should consider self-generated and acquired. मतलब दोनों. For an example, a company has self-generated intangible assets or acquired intangible assets. उन दोनों के classification or relevant accounting standards के according, the auditor is supposed to report under this clause for intangible assets. Now we'll be talking about the part, whether these PPE have been physically verified by the management at reasonable intervals, and whether there any material discrepancies were noticed on such verification, and if so, whether the same has been properly dealt in the books of the accounts. So the reporting under this clause will, the clause requires the auditor to report whether the management has verified the property, plant and equipment at reasonable intervals. The basic point under this clause is that the verification should be at reasonable intervals, and if there's any material discrepancies noticed by the auditor, then they are supposed to report under this clause. The point to be kept note here is that physical verification of the assets is the responsibility of the management. For an example, the company can't ask us that you can physically verify the stock. No, it's their responsibility and they have to fulfill it. And then after, we are supposed to carry out the procedures regarding the physical verification. So this responsibility is of the management and not of the auditor. So as mentioned above.
So the clause says that is there anything in your slide about reasonable interval?
No, sir. Reasonable intervals. No, sir.
So basically, the clause says that the company should have a system of physically verifying the property, plant and equipment at reasonable intervals. So reasonable intervals generally it may be because see if they are large size plant and machineries like suppose NTPC is there or any other cement manufacturing company is there. So if such entities are there, they have the system of their physical verification say over a period of 2 years. That is, every 2 years they physically verify their financial statements, physically verify their property, plant, and equipment, and then they sometimes get it verified from the external agencies, which may be a form of chartered accountant or maybe a form of cost and management accountants, CMAs. So they physically verify it, and uh, with the actual quantity available with the property, plant and equipment register. And wherever suppose there are discrepancies, because there may be a discrepancies because of say certain property, plant and equipment have been scrapped, whereas they are available in the PPE register, or sometimes suppose earlier in PPE register there were no proper recording, and now that has been recorded. So because of these reasons, there may be certain discrepancies. So you need to see that whatever those discrepancies are there, first of all, what is the system of recording those discrepancies? Suppose there is shortage of PPE, so whether uh, uh, such shortage is being informed to the respective corporate governing body or not, maybe the board of directors or maybe some other committee of the board, उनको ये report होना चाहिए, and then after reporting to them, then they should basically approve that yes, now this discrepancies will be accounted for in the books of accounts. तो जितना भी shortage है उसको आप profit and loss के अंदर लेके जाओगे, या excess है तो उसके भी reasons identify करके, और what are the probable entries, वो entries आप उसके अंदर बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में आप पीपी रजिस्टर में आप वो एंट्रीज करोगे. सो ये सारा प्रोसेस हमें एक तो उनका ये प्रोसेस है या नहीं है ये एग्जामिन करना है. अगेन फ्रॉम द पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू कंट्रोल एंड सिक्योरिटी, जो हमने पहले क्लॉज में देखा, तो ये पूरा प्रोसेस कंपनी के उसमें होना चाहिए. और उसके बाद में उस प्रोसेस का एग्जीक्यूशन, दैट मीन्स जो भी रिलेवेंट अकाउंटिंग एंट्रीज बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में होनी चाहिए, वो भी हो रही है या नहीं हो रही है, ये हमें एग्जामिन करना चाहिए. यस.
Okay, sir. Now, when we are discussing about the material discrepancies, then we are supposed to check that the particular thing is material or not. And the following factors will determine whether the discrepancies are material or not. The auditor can verify regarding by keeping in mind these 4 points. That is, the cost of the asset class, and its relation with total cost of the assets by percentage value or numerical count. The nature of the significance of the cost, its value, and in the overall production processing manufacturing process. Materiality threshold may be different for different industries and may also depend upon the size. Material discrepancies is such that it is omitted to be reported or considered, may fail to give a true or fair view. मटीरियल डिस्क्रिपेंसी तभी कंसिडर करेंगे अगर हम लोग उसको रिपोर्ट नहीं करेंगे तो फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स या फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स ट्रू या फेयर व्यू नहीं दे पाएंगे. तो वो these 4 will be the basis for our professional judgment. Now the third clause is about title deeds of immovable property. The clause here states that whether the title deeds of all the immovable properties disclosed in the financial statements are held in the name of the company, and if not, provide the details thereof in the format given below. So whenever we are visiting some audit place or the company, we are supposed to ask the immovable properties which are held in their balance sheet. So we'll be discussing about the description of the property. Sorry. So this is the format which we'll be discussing, that you're supposed to report the description of the property, gross carrying value, held in the name of, and whether the promoter director or the relative or employee in whose name it has been held. So for our reporting, we'll be requiring details of all immovable properties accounted by the company duly reconciled with the financial statements in above format. Matlab basically we reconcile what immovable properties are appearing in the financial statements and what details they have provided us. We are supposed to reconcile both things. The original title deeds, ownership documents need to be provided for verification. अगर title deeds bank के पास deposit भी हो रखी है, so we are supposed to get the certificate from the bank. Or अगर property is not held in the name of the company's name, then the reason is supposed to be specified in this format. Management is responsible for legal determination of the validity of the title deeds. Of course, the title deed should be legally verified. Further, any discrepancies relating to ownership needs detailed discussion with the management and should be properly documented. So basically, this clause is about title deeds. कि अगर हमें कोई मिल प्रॉपर्टी है तो वो कंपनी के नाम पे ही होनी चाहिए, और अगर नहीं है तो we are supposed to give the reasons in this format, that for what reason the mill property is not in the name of the company.
So very, very relevant points are being raised over here regarding title deeds of the property, plant and equipment. Can you come back to the
Yes,
previous
sir.
slide?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. तो खासकर हमें ये ध्यान देना होगा कि एक तो जो भी पुरानी प्रॉपर्टीज हैं, और उसमें मान लीजिए कि अपन ने टाइटल डीड पुरानी प्रॉपर्टीज में ये लिखा हुआ है कि पुरानी रिपोर्ट में या पहले के किसी साल में कि इन पर्टिकुलर प्रॉपर्टीज का टाइटल डीड जो है वो कंपनी के नाम में नहीं है, बल्कि वो किसी और के नाम में है, दैट मे बी समवन, सम डायरेक्टर्स और सम अदर पर्सन्स नेम, है ना। तो ये हमें वी नीड टू टेक द स्टेटस फॉर द ईयर। ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि पिछले साल किसी और के नाम में था, हो सकता है इस साल उस कंपनी ने अपने नाम में कर लिया। तो वो हमें हर साल उस पर्टिकुलर डिटेल को अपडेट भी करना है। वी कैनॉट अज्यूम दिस कि पिछले साल अगर कोई पर्टिकुलर प्रॉपर्टी जो है वो किसी और के नाम में थी, तो इस साल हो सकता है वो इस साल भी वो उसी के नाम में रहेगी, और देयर इज नो चेंज। सो वी नीड टू एक्चुअली टेक द एग्जैक्ट स्टेटस ऑफ ईच ऑफ द प्रॉपर्टी फॉर द ईयर अंडर कंसिडरेशन, ये हमें ध्यान रखना होगा। देन कई बार इसके अंदर कुछ इस तरीके के इश्यूज आ जाते हैं, जैसे मान लीजिए कि गवर्नमेंट ने आपको प्रॉपर्टी अलॉट करी, तो वो आपको सिर्फ एक अलॉटमेंट लेटर दे देता है। दे डू नॉट गिव यू दी एनी स्पेसिफिक टाइटल, so that allotment letter itself is not a title deed. So we have to mention कि साहब ये इन प्रॉपर्टी के अंदर इन्होंने हमें केवल अलॉटमेंट लेटर दिया हुआ है, उसी के बेसिस पे हम इसको रिपोर्ट कर रहे हैं। अदरवाइज देयर इज नो टाइटल डीड फॉर such land which has been allotted to us by the government. एंड इसके अलावा जो भी डिस्प्यूटेड है, कई बार क्या होता है कि सपोज आपने प्रॉपर्टी जो है वो परचेज करी, या फॉर वन और द अदर रीजन दैट प्रॉपर्टी इज इनटू द डिस्प्यूट्स, तो इन्होंने कहा है कि अगर प्रॉपर्टी आपके नाम में नहीं है और आपने अपनी बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में उस प्रॉपर्टी को रखा हुआ है, तो दिस मे बी बिकॉज ऑफ सर्टेन डिस्प्यूट्स। इन्होंने कहा है यू नीड टू रिपोर्ट द रीजंस फॉर नॉट बीइंग हेल्ड इन द नेम ऑफ द कंपनी. So you need to mention about those disputes also, that yes, this was the disputes. Company is in the process of getting the title deed in its own name, but because of this dispute, this particular thing is pending. ये सारी चीजें आपको इसमें इस पर्टिकुलर क्लॉज में रिपोर्ट करने की होती है। यस।
Now the fourth clause is about whether the company has
और खासकर
revalued.
खासकर जो 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 इस साल एडिशंस हुए हैं प्रॉपर्टी प्लांट एंड इक्विपमेंट में, किसी ने कोई लैंड परचेज करी है या जो भी इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी, सॉरी, खासतौर पे जो इस साल एडिशंस हुए हैं, उन एडिशंस को भी हमें ध्यान से वेरीफाई करके और ये देखना होगा कि टाइटल डीड उसके नाम में है या नहीं है। इसमें एक इश्यू आता है रिगार्डिंग स्टॉक इन ट्रेड। तो स्टॉक इन ट्रेड के लिए बेसिकली क्या है कि if any immovable property which is your stock in trade, like जो कंपनीज रियल एस्टेट में डील कर रही है, तो रियल एस्टेट में डील करने वाली कंपनीज के लिए उनके पास इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी तो होती है, बट वो स्टॉक इन ट्रेड है। तो इसके अंदर ये व्यू आ रहा है कि बिकॉज दिस पर्टिकुलर क्लॉज 1C इज रिलेटेड टू दी प्रॉपर्टी, दिस एंटायर क्लॉज 1 अगर अपन बात करें तो वो प्रॉपर्टी प्लांट एंड इक्विपमेंट के रेफरेंस में बात कर रहे हैं। तो हम ये रिपोर्ट करते हैं कि साहब इसके अंदर वो प्रॉपर्टी प्लांट एंड वो इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टीज which are classified as property plant and equipment are being considered over here, and not those properties which are actually stock in trade of the company. तो ये हमें ध्यान में रखना होता है, but still we should actually keep on verifying, even if it is the immovable properties but it is stock in trade. तो हमारे पास में जब भी हम ऑडिट करें तो हम एटलीस्ट ये डाटा एक बार लेके रखें, so that as and when we are going to finally report, we may consider this aspect also कि वहां पे कोई ऐसी इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टीज तो नहीं है जो स्टॉक इन ट्रेड है, बट उनका टाइटल डीड जो है वो कंपनी के फेवर में नहीं हुआ है। सो वी शुड एग्जामिन दिस whether to report on this may be uh, left to the judgment of the respective auditor, accountants and partners. Yes.
Okay, sir. Now the fourth clause is about whether the company has revalued its PPE or intangible assets or both during the year, and if so, whether the revaluation is based on the valuation by registered valuer, specify the amount of change if the change is 10% or more. Basically, this is clause applicable to companies following revaluation model and the changes in the value of the asset due to foreign exchange fluctuation, decommissioning provision, and changes in RU asset due to lease modification not to be considered as revaluation. मतलब अगर revaluation इन तीन चीजों की वजह से हुआ है तो revaluation को consider नहीं करते हैं for reporting under this clause. As per the requirement of this clause, the auditor has to report on whether the company during the year has revalued its PPE or whether the revaluation is based on the valuation of registered value. मतलब basically as an auditor we are supposed to check कि revaluation हुआ है पर the revaluation should be based on the valuation by registered valuer. The auditor, while reporting under this clause, should review the disclosure requirements for revalued assets as per the applicable financial reporting framework. Or we are supposed to report only if the change is 10% or more in aggregate of the net carrying value of each class of PPE or intangible assets. So this was about the clause D. Moving on to the fifth clause, that is Benami transaction. This clause states whether there is any proceedings have been initiated or pending against the company for holding any Benami property under the Benami Transaction Act. And if so, whether the company has appropriately disclosed the details in its financial statements. So basically, as an auditor, we are supposed to we are required to examine whether appropriate disclosures are made in the financial statements. अगर बेनामी transactions हैं, that is fine. या फिर कोई proceedings चल रही, that is fine. But the issue is that we are supposed to report in the disclosures have been made in the financial statements. We have to report on this. Depending on the merits of the case, the auditor is also required to evaluate whether the liability is required to be disclosed as contingent liability or whether provisions are required to be made. So this is our part of work. So for reporting under this clause, we are supposed to check that whether any proceedings have been initiated or are pending against the company for holding any Benami transactions. And if the answer is yes, then the company is supposed to provide us the list of the properties for which the proceedings have been initiated. And we are supposed to check that what steps have been taken by the company regarding and what legal stand has been taken by the company on such legal proceedings which have been initiated against the company and how the same has been disclosed in the financial statements. So this was about the Benami first clause. The first clause ends here.
So here also basically issue comes regarding, first of all, it is about the can you come back to the previous slide? Yes. First of all, it is about the whether the company has appropriately disclosed the details in the financial statements. So that means, as Shreya has told, that appropriate reporting even in the contingent liabilities should also be there. And apart from that, a brief fact about such litigation, such proceedings should also be mentioned along with the relevant details of the properties which are held as Benami or which are alleged to be held as Benami by the company. So that one need to report. And apart from this, one need to also see, because see, this particular aspect may also be there in the case of your stock in trade. Again, the same query arises with reference to the stock in trade also. So here also the view is this, that the clause related to the PPE, but still we need to examine with reference to the stock in trade whether uh, any proceeding is being pending in respect of such stock in trade again in the Benami Transaction Prohibition Act or not. And suppose it is not otherwise being reported for the CARO purpose, but if there is anything, uh, even if related to the stock, then one must see whether such facts is required to be disclosed in the financial statements or not. So that professional judgment one has to take in this particular respect. Yes.
Okay. Now moving on to the second clause, that is about inventories and working capital limit. So this clause, the first part of the clause second says, whether physical verification of inventory has been conducted at reasonable intervals by the management, and whether in the opinion of the auditor, the coverage and procedure for such verification by the management is appropriate, and whether any discrepancies of 10% or more were noticed, and if so, whether they have been properly dealt with within the books of the accounts. बेसिकली इस क्लॉज के अंदर तीन चीजें ध्यान रखनी है. रीजनेबल इंटरवल्स पे फिजिकल वेरिफिकेशन होना चाहिए. जो प्रोसीजर मैनेजमेंट ने लिया है फॉर वेरिफिकेशन इज करेक्ट, और अगर कोई डिस्क्रिपेंसीज है फॉर मोर देन 10%, तो ऑडिटर इज रिक्वायर्ड टू रिपोर्ट. The reporting is, the auditor should determine whether the procedure for identifying damaged and obsolete items of inventory are well designed. मतलब जो procedure है verification करने का, that should be proper. The observation of physical verification of records of physical verification of inventory is the primary source of evidence for the purpose of reporting under this clause. And for an example, if the stock is held by third parties, the auditor should obtain confirmations of stock held by them. और 10% जो भी थ्रेशोल्ड है वो हम कैलकुलेट करेंगे ऑन द नेट बेसिस आफ्टर एडजस्टिंग एनी एक्सेस एंड शॉर्टेज विद इन द क्लास ऑफ एनी इन्वेंट्री. हाँ, so basically reporting requirements audit purpose के लिए with records showing full particulars of various type of inventories, duly signed complete list of all types of inventories, list of all items under physical verification, and comparison of book stock and physical stock at year end. There should be a comparison or reconciliation. List of stock held or lying with third party with reasons, purpose, and written confirmation. Auditor will also conduct physical verification of inventories on random basis. As discussed earlier, we are not responsible for for physically verifying, but we can on some random basis. So this was the reporting.
So here, can you come back to the previous slide? Yeah. So here, anyone will tell about the which standards on auditing essay, which essay deals with the physical verification of stock related to the existence of inventory. Anybody will tell? Arastu? Yes, I think कुछ लोग आंसर कर रहे हैं. राहुल ने 501 बोला है. Yes, essay 501 audit evidence, specific considerations. So basically, this particular essay 501 deals with the determination of existence of the inventory during the course of audit. So ये जो clause है, इस clause को हमें essay 501 से भी link करना होता है. तो essay 501 ये कहता है कि साहब क्या management का एक particular what are the controls and how do the management actually verify the inventory items. So whether it is such verification is being done at reasonable intervals, and what are the processes, what are the controls, who are the persons who actually physically verify, whether they are actually capable of understanding the business as well as nature of the inventory of the company. So ये बहुत सारी चीजें one has to take a representation as well as verify from the auditors, from the auditee, whether all these things are being followed by the company or not. And after that, how do they actually internally verify? एक तो ये देखना होता है कि ये इन्वेंट्री वेरिफिकेशन का एक प्रोसेस इनके यहाँ पे है, and then that process has been actually executed by the company during the year. That also one need to see. और वो जो प्रोसेस उन्होंने किया है, और जब वो ये प्रोसेस फिजिकल वेरिफिकेशन का कर रहे होते हैं, तो एट द सेम टाइम as per SA 501, the auditor is required to make a test count of these inventories. मतलब वो अपना पूरा 100% फिजिकल वेरिफिकेशन करेंगे, उसका एज ए ऑडिटी, मतलब वो अपने ऑडिटर्स को अपना सर्टिफिकेशन देंगे कि हमने ये फिजिकल वेरिफिकेशन सारी इन्वेंट्री का किया है. बट ऑडिटर आल्सो नीड टू एंगेज ए टीम along with the client, so that when they are physically verifying, some of the items may be on random sample basis, maybe on test check basis. A test count can be done by the auditors or required to be done by the auditors as per SA 501. और इस particular फिजिकल वेरिफिकेशन के बाद में जो भी ऑडिटर जो भी डिस्क्रिपेंसीज मिलती है, उन डिस्क्रिपेंसीज को प्रॉपरली बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में आपको एडजस्ट करना है। और कुछ थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट्स इन्होंने 10% की दे रखी है, तो वो 10% की लिमिट को भी ध्यान में रखते हुए and one need to actually verify whether proper entries have been done by the auditee or not in the books of account. Yes. So again, very important process regarding physical verification of the inventories. Next.
Okay, sir. Now, the second clause is about the working capital limit. The clause here states that whether during any point of time of the year, the company has been sanctioned working capital limits in excess of 5 crores rupees in aggregate from banks or financial institutions on the basis of security of current assets. Whether the quarterly returns or statements filed by the company with such banks or financial instruments are in agreement with the books of accounts of the company. If not, give details. So this clause requires the auditors to comment on whether during any point of time of the year, the company has sanctioned working limits in excess of 5 crores limit, in excess of 5 crores rupees. The utilization may be less than sanctioned limit of 5 crores, but such cases will also be covered for the purpose of reporting. So basically the point to be here, ध्यान रखने की बात ये है कि 5 करोड़ सैंक्शन लिमिट है, ना कि यूटिलाइजेशन लिमिट। यूटिलाइज हम कम भी कर सकते हैं, तब रिपोर्टिंग नहीं होगी, पर अगर सैंक्शन 5 करोड़ के एक्सेस में हुआ है, then the auditor is required to report on such working capital limits. The auditor is not required to audit such quarterly returns statements, but only required to compare the same with the books of accounts. Clause के अंदर एक key point भी है that the auditor is required to report on the returns, that whether the returns has been properly furnished or not. The auditor is not required to audit, but only required to compare the same with the books of accounts and report disagreement. If any discrepancies arise when such return statements are compared with the books of accounts, the auditor is required to report the same. So this was about the second clause.
So, Shreya, come back to the previous slide.
Yes, sir.
So first of all, you need to see whether the working capital limit is more than 5 crore or not. So it is about the limit, not about the how much limit they have actually utilized. So even if the amount is in excess of 5 crore, working capital limit sanction amount is in excess of 5 crore, but if they have actually drawn only say rupees 4 crores or 3 crores, which is less than 5 crores, even then this particular clause is applicable. First of all, this. And then according to the sanction, you will see that the sanction, all bank sanctions requires that the borrower, that is the company, the auditee company, they have to furnish the quarterly statements of the current assets. So first of all, what is current asset? करंट असेट में केवल इन्वेंट्री नहीं होगा, करंट असेट्स में आपका इन्वेंट्री, आपका डेटर्स, आपका कोई इवन जो क्रेडिटर्स होता है, क्योंकि जो सैंक्शंस होती है बैंक की वो होती है ड्राइंग पावर लिमिट के बेसिस पे, और जब ड्राइंग पावर लिमिट कैलकुलेट करते हैं तो उसके अंदर आपका जो नेट करंट एसेट होता है, दैट नेट करंट एसेट इज बेसिकली आफ्टर डिडक्टिंग दी क्रेडिटर्स। तो ये आपको सैंक्शन लेटर में देखना होता है कि हम इनकी ड्राइंग पावर कैसे कैलकुलेट बैंक इनकी ड्राइंग पावर कैलकुलेट कैसे करता है, और उसी कैलकुलेशन के बेसिस पे जब ये क्वार्टरली रिटर्न्स और जब ये स्टेटमेंट्स फर्निश करते हैं, तो उन क्वार्टरली रिटर्न्स और स्टेटमेंट्स में क्या होता है, यही सारी चीजें लिखी हुई होती है कि हमारी जो डेटर्स हैं एज ऑन ए पर्टिकुलर डेट वो ये हैं, हमारे क्रेडिटर्स हैं वो ये हैं, और हमारे जो भी इन्वेंट्री है वो ये है, और जो दूसरी करंट एसेट्स हैं वो ये हैं, कैश, बैंक बैलेंस, एफडीआर, ये सारी चीजें आपको उसके अंदर देनी होती है अकॉर्डिंग टू दी सैंक्शन लेटर विच हैज बीन गिवन बाय द बैंक। अब इसमें बहुत सारे इश्यूज इन्वॉल्व हो जाते हैं। सबसे पहले तो एक इश्यू ये आता है कि सब मतलब खास करके जो अनलिस्टेड कंपनीज है, क्योंकि अनलिस्टेड कंपनीज के यहाँ पे ट्रायल बैलेंस कभी फ्रीज नहीं होता है ना, क्वार्टरली बेसिस पे फ्रीज नहीं होता है, लेकिन फिर भी वो सपोज बैंक सैंक्शन के लेटर के बेसिस पे उसको वो पर्टिकुलर स्टेटमेंट बैंक को देना है। तो हाउ टू एग्जामिन दिस पर्टिकुलर एस्पेक्ट, कि इधर तो इन्होंने बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स पर्टिकुलर उस पर्टिकुलर डेट की बनाई नहीं, और उस तरफ वहां पे उन्होंने कुछ डेटर्स क्रेडिटर्स और वो सारी चीजें उनको रिपोर्ट कर दी। So suppose client is able to provide us that particular trial balance or that particular balance sheet profit and loss account on that particular date। जैसे मान लीजिए कि 30 जून को उन्होंने फर्निश करा कि हमारा स्टॉक ये है, और 30 जून का वो आपको ट्रायल बैलेंस और वो एक आपको दे के और दे देते हैं, तो आपको एक रीजनेबल, यू नीड नॉट टू ऑडिट दैट पर्टिकुलर ट्रायल बैलेंस एज ऑन दैट पर्टिकुलर डेट, बट आपको एक रीजनेबल अपना आईक्यू लगा कि ये देखना होता है कि ये ट्रायल बैलेंस ठीक तो है कि नहीं है। ऐसा तो नहीं है कि उन्होंने बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में तो वास्तव में बुक्स में कुछ और ही दे रखा है और ट्रायल बैलेंस मेरे को कुछ और ही दे दिया। तो ये एक रीजनेबल असेसमेंट करना होगा, और उसके बेसिस पे देन यू नीड टू रिपोर्ट कि सब जो ट्रायल बैलेंस इन्होंने एक्सट्रैक्ट किया है, दो दैट इज नॉट ऑडिटेड, बट उसके बेसिस पे जो फाइनेंशियल जो बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स जो इन्होंने इन्वेंट्री और जो भी करंट एसेट की सिचुएशन बैंक को दी है, वो उससे मैच कर रही है या उससे मैच नहीं कर रही है, वो आपको एक रिपोर्टिंग करनी होगी। एंड सपोज द क्लाइंट सेज कि साहब हम तो उस वक्त ये पर्टिकुलर चीज देके ही हमने ये पर्टिकुलर चीज बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट से मैच ही नहीं करी, हम तो केवल एस्टिमेट बेसिस पे ही उनको दे दिया है, देन यू नीड टू एक्चुअली मेंशन ए डिस्क्लेमर इन योर रिपोर्ट कि साहब इन्होंने बैंक को तो स्टेटमेंट्स दिए हैं, लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम दे हैव नॉट कंप्लीटेड the they have not prepared their books of accounts up to date, मतलब, or therefore we are not able to actually report it कि whether the same are in agreement with the books of accounts or not। तो ये one has to take a professional judgment based on the documentation which has been provided by the client। कई बार ऐसा होता है कि जो टोटल लिमिट है वो लिमिट आपने कम यूटिलाइज करी, और आपने जो स्टॉक दिया वो भी कम ही दिया, जबकि बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में ज्यादा आ रहा है, या कंपनी की एज ए होल बुक्स जो है वो देर आर सपोज 4-5 यूनिट्स, और जो कंपनी ने वर्किंग कैपिटल लिमिट ले रखी है वो स्पेसिफिक 2-3 यूनिट से रिलेटेड ही ले रखी है। तो आपको जो वर्किंग कैपिटल लिमिट जो ले रखी है जिस पर्टिकुलर यूनिट के लिए, उस पर्टिकुलर यूनिट का स्टॉक और उस पर्टिकुलर यूनिट की करंट एसेट से एग्रीमेंट हो रहा है या नहीं हो रहा है, ये आपको देखना है। ये नहीं देखना है कि पूरा कंपनी एज ए होल स्टॉक कितना है, क्योंकि उस सैंक्शन में ये लिखा हुआ होगा कि हमें इस पर्टिकुलर यूनिट के अगेंस्ट में हमने ये पर्टिकुलर वर्किंग कैपिटल लोन दे रखा है। तो देर आर सो मेनी थिंग्स जो जब आप ऑडिट करेंगे और सैंक्शन लेटर से उन चीजों को देखेंगे, और बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स से एग्रीमेंट आप कोशिश करेंगे, तो देन यू मे कम आउट विथ वेरियस अदर ऑब्जर्वेशंस। ये तो 2-3 मैंने इस तरीके के एग्जांपल्स दिए हैं, कुछ और भी तरीके की ऑब्जर्वेशंस इसके अंदर आपको आ सकती है। सो यू नीड टू यूज योर आईक्यू। ये केवल सिंपल ऐसा काम नहीं है कि हमें 2 स्टेटमेंट मिल जाएंगे और उनको वेरीफाई करके और सिंपल हमें रिपोर्टिंग करनी है। सो एक पूरा अच्छे तरीके से ये ऑडिट होना चाहिए। वर्किंग कैपिटल लिमिट के रिलेटेड जितने भी डॉक्यूमेंट्स हम बैंक में सबमिट करते हैं। अच्छा, एक और चीज हमें इसमें देखनी होती है कि साहब जो बैंक में सबमिट किए हैं डॉक्यूमेंट्स, तो क्या प्रॉपर बैंक की सील उन पर्टिकुलर डॉक्यूमेंट्स पे है या नहीं है। ऐसा तो नहीं है कि मैंने एक राइटिंग में चिट्ठी लिख दी बैंक को और उसके साथ में पीछे कुछ डॉक्यूमेंट अटैच कर दिए और बैंक की उस पर्टिकुलर डॉक्यूमेंट से रिलेटेड कोई भी एक्नॉलेजमेंट नहीं है। तो यू नीड टू ऑल्सो वेरीफाई कि जो भी डॉक्यूमेंट्स आपने बैंक को दिए हैं, कंपनी ने बैंक को दिए हैं, वो सारे डॉक्यूमेंट्स जो है प्रॉपरली एक्नॉलेज बाय द बैंक है या नहीं। अगर वो एक्नॉलेज नहीं है और केवल आपकी चिट्ठी के बेसिस पे दिए हुए हैं, तो आप क्लाइंट को ये भी कह सकते हो कि साहब ये यही डॉक्यूमेंट हमने बैंक को दिए हैं, कंपनी ने बैंक को दिए हैं, इसकी आप कंफर्मेशन लेकर आइए। एंड देन ओनली यू शुड बेसिकली कंपेयर सच रिटर्न्स डॉक्यूमेंट्स विद द बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स। ये भी आपको ध्यान रखना चाहिए। Yes.
Okay, sir. Now moving on to the clause number 3. So basically clause 3 contains 5 subclauses. We'll be discussing the 5 clauses at the end. Matlab, I'll be discussing just the clauses here. So this 5 clause discuss about loans, advance guarantees, securities and the investments given by the company. So the first clause under clause 3 is whether during the year the company has made investments in, provided any guarantee or security, or granted any loans or advances in the nature of loan, secured or unsecured, to companies, firms, LLPs, or any other parties. And if so, whether during the year the company has provided loans or advances to any other entity. और अगर ऐसा कुछ हमने किसी को लोन्स एडवांस दे रखे हैं, so we are supposed to indicate the aggregate amount during the year and the balance outstanding at the balance sheet date with respect to such loans or advances and guarantees or securities to subsidiaries, joint ventures, and associates. And the B part states about to parties other than subsidiaries, JVs, and associates. So basically ये दो जो पार्ट हैं वो इसी बारे में है कि अगर सब्सिडीज जेवी एसेट को दे रखे तो फर्स्ट पार्ट में रिपोर्टिंग होगी, और अगर एनी अदर पार्टी अदर देन सब्सिडीज जेवी एसोसिएट्स हैं तो बी पार्ट में रिपोर्टिंग होगी. एंड थर्ड का बी है द टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस नॉट प्रीजुडिशियल. With the investments made, guarantees provided, security given, and the terms and conditions of the grant of the loans and advances in the nature of loans and guarantees provided are not prejudicial to the company's interest. मतलब जो भी the auditor basically has to review the process of issuance of guarantees. जो भी issuance हुई guarantees की, loans की, उसका process क्या था issuance का, और उसके respect में जो compliance conditions हैं और उसमें he should make sure that he has obtained prior approval of the financial institutions. And the C clause is about schedule of repayment regular. In respect of loans and advances in the nature of loans, whether the schedule of repayment of principal and payment of interest has been stipulated and whether the repayments are receipts are regular. जो भी लोन्स एडवांसेस कंपनी किसी और को देती है, चाहे वो बेसिकली वो रिसिप्ट्स ही होंगे, तो रिसिप्ट्स और पेमेंट जो है वो प्रॉपर इंटरवल्स पे मतलब प्रॉपर्ली होने चाहिए. लिस्ट, सो बेसिकली हम उसमें लिस्ट ले सकते हैं, list of due dates of receipt of interest and principal along with the actual date of receipt of same containing above requirements. We can reconcile both the things कि कब actually पैसा रिसीव हो रहा है और कब due dates actually थी. The D clause is about amount overdue for more than 90 days and reasonable steps for recovery. This clause states about if the amount is overdue, state the total amount overdue for more than 90 days and whether reasonable steps have been taken by the company for recovery of principal and interest. Basically यहाँ पे एक टाइम एक डेज का लिमिट डाल दिया है कि 90 डेज से ऊपर अगर आपके लोन्स एडवांस जा रहे हैं और आपको रिपेमेंट नहीं हो रहा है तो आपको इसके अंदर रिपोर्टिंग करनी है. So we are supposed to create a party-wise list of such cases containing above requirements along with the remarks about what steps have been taken by the company to recover such overdue amount. मतलब overdue अगर 20th मार्च का था और 20th मार्च के बाद 90 days के बाद आपका पैसा recover नहीं हुआ है, so as an auditor we are required to report on the reasonable steps the company has taken for recovery of those overdue amount. The E clause is about evergreening of loan. Under this clause, the clause is as whether any loans or advance in the nature of loan granted which has been fallen due during the year has been renewed. मतलब अगर कोई लोन और एडवांस इस साल में ड्यू हो रहा था पर विच हैज बीन रिन्यूड, यूजुअली हम ऐसा होता है हमने किसी को लोन दिया है पर उसने रिन्यू एक्सटेंड करा लिया फ्रेश लोन लेकर, तो वी आर सपोज टू रिपोर्ट ऑन दिस दैट वेदर एनी लोन हैज बीन रिन्यूड or extended of fresh loans granted so to settle the overdue of existing loan given to same parties, and if so specify the aggregate amount of such dues renewed or extended. हमें बेसिक लोन की इंफॉर्मेशन डालनी है, हमें एक्सटेंडेड और जो रिन्यू हुए लोन्स उनके बारे में रिपोर्ट करना है अंडर दिस क्लॉज, एंड द परसेंटेज ऑफ द एग्रीगेट टू द टोटल लोन्स और एडवांस इन द नेचर ऑफ द लोन्स granted during the year. And this clause will not be applicable to the companies whose principal business is to give loans. The clause 3 ka E part will not be applicable to such companies.
So, yeah, so very important clause. As the clause states, evergreening of the loan. मतलब आपने लोन दे रखा है और उसको बस आप आगे से आगे एक्सटेंड किए जा रहे हो, तो आप क्या कर रहे हो कि आपको लोन दिया है, आपने उस लोन को अकॉर्डिंग टू द टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस एक बार रिकवर कर लिया, लेकिन फिर आपने उसको वापस दे दिया फ्रेश लोन देके. या आपने टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस को फिर चेंज कर दिया कि साहब ये 2 साल में मुझे आना था, और जो ही 2 साल कंप्लीट हुए तो मैंने फिर इसको एक्सटेंड करके और ये कह दिया कि साहब नाउ आई हैव चेंज माय टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस एंड नाउ इट विल बी रिकवर्ड आफ्टर अनदर 2 years. So if these type of things are there for the loans, advances, and other investments, then one need to actually report this also कि साहब ये इस तरीके की evergreening of loan इस particular case में हो रही है. Amounts are either not recovered, or if they are recovered, they are again being extended by a fresh loans. तो ये जब कभी भी अपनी लोन की रिकवरी हो रही है, तो जितने भी लोन के अकाउंट हैं जो अपने कंपनी ने दे रखे हैं, वो सारे आपको उनका लेजर स्क्रूटनी करके और ये देखना चाहिए कि व्हाट इज द ट्रेल ऑफ द वेरियस ट्रांजैक्शंस व्हिच आर बीइंग देयर बाय द कंपनी व्हाइल मेकिंग दीज लोन्स टू द another companies or another parties. Yes.
Now the F clause is about loan repayable on demand to related parties. This clause is whether the company has granted any loans or advance in the nature of loans, either repayable or on demand, or without specifying any terms or period of repayment, and if so, specify the aggregate amount, percentage thereof, of the total loans granted and the amount of loans granted to promoters, related parties, as defined in clause 76. इस क्लॉज के अंदर देयर मे बी केसेस हमने अपनी रिलेटेड पार्टी को लोन्स दे रखे हो, प्रमोटर्स को लोन्स दे रखे हो, चाहे वो रिपेबल हो, चाहे वो रिपेबल ऑन डिमांड हो, चाहे कुछ भी एग्रीमेंट में स्पेसिफाइड नहीं हो, वी आर सपोज टू रिपोर्ट अंडर दिस क्लॉज, clause 3F. So now this is the requirements which are we'll be following during our procedure, during our reporting. Basically the third part is about अगर हमने लोन से एडवांस दे रखे हैं इन द नेचर ऑफ लोन्स secured or unsecured to companies, firm, LLP or any other parties. The auditor should obtain an understanding around the controls and procedures established by the company with regard to making of investments, provision of guarantees, security, grant of loans, and check the operating effectiveness of the same. In respect of guarantees, security, loans, and advances, the details of amount outstanding as 31st March of the year should be obtained from the management. Guarantee given by the company is a contingent liability. The auditor is normally concerned with seeking reasonable assurance that all the contingent liabilities are identified and properly valued. The auditor should perform appropriate procedures and examine records like the minutes of the board meetings. इससे अगर हम बोर्ड मीटिंग्स के मिनट्स वगैरह को चेक करेंगे सो वील बेसिकली गेट द आइडिया कि जो गारंटीज या लोन एडवांसेस हमने दिए हैं वो प्रॉपर्ली इंक्लूड हैं उस लिस्ट में या फिर नहीं है. The auditor should also take into consideration the loans and advances in the nature of loan transactions that have been squared up during the year and report such transaction under this clause. For an example, अगर हमने loans and advance दिए भी हैं पर वो हमें उसी year में मिल भी गए, that doesn't mean कि हम इस clause के अंदर reporting नहीं करेंगे. The reporting will be there. अगर वो score up भी हो जाते हैं loan during the year. So this was about the third clause. Now moving on to the fourth clause.
तो ये जो प्रोविजंस हैं रिलेटेड टू द रिपोर्टिंग, ये किसी भी लोन्स एंड एडवांसेस से रिलेटेड है. इट इज नॉट अबाउट दैट एनी पार्टी विच आर कवर्ड अंडर सेक्शन 185 और 89. जो ये क्लॉज 3 इन्होंने डिस्कस किया है, दे आर विद रेफरेंस टू द एनी लोन्स एंड एडवांसेस गिवन. क्यों श्रेया, ऐसा ही है?
हाँ सर
है ना? हाँ. तो 185 186 के क्लॉजेस अब आ रहे हैं. एक बार वापस पीछे आना.
हाँ.
थोड़ा और पीछे आओ.
हाँ. फर्स्ट वाला सर, फर्स्ट क्लॉज.
हाँ बस ठीक है. शेड्यूल ऑफ क्लॉज 3C ए और बी भी आ जाओ एक बार.
हाँ.
Yes. Clause A, aggregate amount during the year and balance outstanding at the balance sheet date. The company has made investment, provided guarantee or security to any companies, firms, limited liability partnership or any other parties. If so, whether during the year company has provided loans or provided advance in nature of loans or issued guarantee or provided security to any other entity. If so, indicate the aggregate amount during the year and the balance outstanding at the balance sheet date with respect to such loans or advances. तो जैसा श्रेया ने बताया कि ये हमें ऐसा नहीं है कि केवल जो ट्रांजेक्शन लास्ट में आउटस्टैंडिंग है उन्हीं की बात करनी है, आपको ओवरऑल कितना आपने दिया लोन वो भी देना है और टोटल कितना आउटस्टैंडिंग है वो भी देना है ना. नाउ कम टू द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड.
Yes, sir.
एंड टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस आर नॉट प्रिजुडिशियल. तो दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. ये आप कैसे डिटरमाइन करोगे कि सब टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस आर नॉट प्रिजुडिशियल टू द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द कंपनी. तो कहीं पे भी मान लीजिए कि आपके पास में आप तो खुद तो बोरोइंग लेके और पैसा ले रहे हो और सामने वाले को ये कह दिया कि साहब मैं आपको इंटरेस्ट फ्री दे देता हूँ, या आपने 12% का लोन लेके और सामने जो जिस किसी पार्टी को दिया है उसको आपने 8% पे ही दे दिया. तो आई डोंट से दैट ये बिल्कुल नॉट प्रिजुडिशियल हो सकता है, बट यू शुड एग्जामिन कि ये ऐसा क्या रीजन रहा कि साहब ये पर्टिकुलर जो अमाउंट ऑफ लोन है वो आपने 8% पे दे दिया, जबकि अपन खुद 12% पे 12% पे हमने लोन अमाउंट ले रखा है फ्रॉम द बैंक्स और अदर अदर एंटिटीज. तो इफ सच कंडीशंस आर देयर, है ना, या आपके पास में खुद के बिजनेस में इन्वेस्ट करने के लिए पैसा नहीं है और आपने किसी और को दे दिया, तो ये सब चीजें जो है किस तरीके से बोर्ड इसको कंसीडर करता है व्हाइल गिविंग दी लोन्स एंड एडवांसेस. तो जैसा एक बताया था कि भाई हम बोर्ड के मिनट्स वगैरह भी देखेंगे जब कभी भी इस तरीके के लोन किसी पर्टिकुलर कंपनी या किसी पर्टिकुलर एंटिटी को दे रखे हैं, तो हाउ टू द डिसीजन आर बीइंग टेकन बाय द बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स इज ऑल्सो इम्पोर्टेंट. तो जब बोर्ड ने दिया तो उन्होंने ये सारे जो भी टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस की बात करी है उसको किस तरीके से एड्रेस किया. क्या उन्होंने कहा कि साहब ये पर्टिकुलर वजह है जिसकी वजह से हम इसको लोन दे रहे हैं, या ये पर्टिकुलर एस्पेक्ट है कि दैट इज व्हाई दिस पर्टिकुलर लोन इज नॉट प्रिजुडिशियल टू द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द कंपनी. ये सारे एस्पेक्ट्स आपको देखने होंगे. और जब कभी भी लोन दिया जा रहा है तो एक उन्होंने बोला कि सब कंट्रोल्स आर देयर और नॉट, है ना. appropriate security and controls are there or not. तो वो सिक्योरिटी और कंट्रोल्स क्या होंगे कि जिस किसी भी पार्टीज को आप पैसा दे रहे हो, तो क्या आपने ये जज किया कि ये पर्टिकुलर पार्टी से पैसा वापस आएगा तो किस तरीके से आएगा, वेदर दे आर केपेबल टू रिटर्न और नॉट, वेदर दे हैव कैपेसिटी और क्रेडिट वर्दीनेस और नॉट. ये सब चीजें आपने किस तरीके से अपने रिकॉर्ड पर कंपनी लेकर के आई है बिफोर गिविंग लोन्स एंड एडवांस टू देम. सपोज ये सारी चीजें भी उन्होंने एग्जामिन नहीं करी और बिना किसी पर्टिकुलर रिकॉर्ड के और बिना पर्टिकुलर प्रोसेस के सीधा सिंपली एक चेक काट के और इन पार्टीज को दे दिया, देन यू मे से कि साहब यहाँ पे प्रॉपर इंटरनल कंट्रोल नहीं है फॉर गिविंग द लोन्स एंड एडवांस टू दीज पार्टीज. तो वो एक प्रॉपर डॉक्यूमेंटेशन हुआ या नहीं हुआ ये आपको वेरीफाई करना होगा, है ना. नेक्स्ट.
तो आगे बढ़ो.
शेड्यूल ऑफ रेगुलर. तो ये फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल यू नीड टू सी दैट व्हाट आर द टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस, और उसके बेसिस पे अगर रीपेमेंट वापस नहीं आ रहा है ना, और रीपेमेंट आर रेगुलर मींस सपोज कोई पैसा आपको क्वार्टरली आना है ना, तो वो पैसा क्वार्टरली नहीं आके और वो पैसा आपको सपोज हर बार जब भी क्वार्टर में आता तो वो एक महीने डिले से आ रहा है, तो दैट इज ऑल्सो नॉट रेगुलर. या ईयर एंड पे सारा पैसा आ गया लेकिन पूरे साल के अंदर वो पैसा नहीं आया, जबकि रीपेमेंट शेड्यूल ये था कि सब वो क्वार्टरली पैसा आना है. तो इन दैट केस ऑल्सो इट इज नॉट द रेगुलर रिसीट ऑफ द पेमेंट. और फिर आगे एक क्लॉज ये है कि टर्म्स ऑफ रीपेमेंट आर नॉट डिफाइंड. तो वो भी आपको डिटरमाइन करना है कि साहब अगर टर्म्स ऑफ रीपेमेंट डिटरमाइंड नहीं है तो उसकी रिपोर्टिंग आपकी सेपरेटली होगी अंडर द डिफरेंट क्लॉज. एंड देन overdue amount, state the total amount overdue for more than 90 days and whether reasonable steps have been taken by the company for recovery of principal and interest. तो हम बात कर रहे हैं जहां पे 90 दिन से ज्यादा आउटस्टैंडिंग अमाउंट हो गया, ओवरड्यू हो गया, कि आपको पैसा आ जाना था जबकि 90 दिन तक वो पैसा नहीं आया अगले. तो ऐसे केस के अंदर व्हाट स्टेप्स हैव बीन टेकन by the company for recovery. क्या उन्होंने जो भी लोनी है, जो भी जिसको भी आपने पैसा दे रखा है, उससे पैसा वापस मांगने के लिए कोई उससे करस्पॉन्डेंस है, उसके बाद भी उसका जवाब नहीं आया है, तो क्या उन्होंने कोई कोर्ट केस फाइल किया है, या जो भी दूसरी लीगल रेमेडीज हैं, उन लीगल रेमेडीज का उन्होंने कंपनी ने यूज किया या नहीं किया, ये सब चीजें आपको देखनी होती है वेयर एवर अमाउंट इज नॉट रिसीव्ड फ्रॉम दी इन्वेस्टी और फ्रॉम दी लोनी, फ्रॉम दी बोरोवर. नेक्स्ट. Next, Shreya.
Okay.
Both these clauses we have discussed. Yes, now you can continue.
Okay, sir. Now moving on to the clause number 4, that is loan to directors and corporate. Loan investments in respect of loans, investments, guarantees and securities, where the provision of section 185 and 186 of the Companies Act have been compiled with, and if not, provide the details thereof. So basically, this clause is about section 185, 186 के हमने provisions compile किए हैं नहीं किए. Now the section 185 is 185 the Act prohibits advance of any loan to directors etc., directly or indirectly. The provisions of the section 185 of the Act shall not apply to government companies. Basically, हम कोई भी advance या कुछ भी चाहे directly चाहे indirectly directors को नहीं दे सकते हैं of the company. But this section 195 will not apply to government companies. For an example, अगर किसी कंपनी ने अपने डायरेक्टर को लोन दे रखा है, so the reporting requirements arise in this clause, under this clause. And this clause will not be applicable to government companies. Sorry, हाँ, 185 के provisions जो हैं वो government company पे apply नहीं होंगे. In case such company obtains prior approval of the Ministry of Department of the central government, or as the case may be, the central government before making any loan or giving any guarantee or providing any security under this section. Or section 186 governs giving loans or guarantee or providing any security in connection with a loan by a person to any person or any other body corporate, or requiring securities of any other body corporate by a company. Basically, 185 was specifically about loan to directors, and 186 specifically talks about providing any security in connection with any loan by a company to any person or any other body corporate. Here, there's no specifications regarding the directors. The point over here is more than 2 layers of investment prohibited under section 186. The provision of section 186 of the Act shall not apply to a government company engaged in defense production and a government company. So basically, अगर ये दो requirements किसी company में fulfill नहीं होती है, so we are required to report under clause number 4. And the sections are defined as under. So this was the end of clause number 4. Now we'll continue to clause number 5. Am I audible? So am I audible?
Yes, yes, you can continue. So
Okay.
in clause 185, 186, the clause are same as they were there in the CARO 2016 itself. So we have been discussing it time and again in earlier clauses also.
Okay.
Yes, clause 5.
Now moving on to further, we'll be discussing about clause number 5. This clause number 5 is about in respect of deposits accepted by the company or amounts which are deemed to be deposits, whether the directives issued by the RBI and the provision of section 73, 76 or any other relevant provision of the Companies Act. The nature of such contraventions to be stated मतलब डिपॉजिट्स के बारे में है, और अगर 73 और 76 की क्लॉजेस को अगर कंप्लाई नहीं करते हैं, so we are required to report of the nature of the contraventions, and if the order has been passed by company or any other or any NCLT or RBI, the same has been compiled with or not. अगर किसी ने कोई भी ऑर्डर निकाले हैं, चाहे कंपनी निकाले हों, चाहे एनसीएलटी या फिर आरबीआई, उन ऑर्डर को भी अगर कंपनी जो एक्सेप्ट करे डिपॉजिट उनको कंप्लाई नहीं कर रही है, सो वी आर रिक्वायर्ड टू रिपोर्ट अंडर दिस क्लॉज. So section 73 of the Acts prohibits a company to invite, accept or renew deposits from a public except in the manner provided in this section. हम public से पैसा तभी ले सकते हैं if in the manner provided under this section. Now, section 76 permits the public companies having specified net worth or turnover to accept deposits from persons other than its members subject to compliance. 76 में लिमिट है, अगर कंपनी की नेटवर्थ या टर्नओवर होगी तभी वो इन लोगों से पैसा एक्सेप्ट कर सकती है. This was about clause number 5. Now, now Purvika will continue for the next 5 clauses. One second.
So, Purvika, before you explain the clause, what was your learning while reading this guidance note? Can you please brief to the all participants?
Sir, you are asking me or Purvika?
Purvika.
Okay, wait 1 second.
Hello.
Yes, Purvika.
So as I said earlier at the beginning of the class, learning was
अच्छा,
good.
तुमने ही बताया था क्या पहले? So, sorry, that, yeah, you, Shreya, you can tell.
Actually, both stated one by one in the beginning of the class.
Okay, you can continue, Purvika, with your clauses.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now we are to clause 6, maintenance of cost records. This clause states where the maintenance of cost records has been specified by CG under section 148 subsection 1 of Companies Act and whether such accounts and records have been so made and maintained. There has been no change from CARO 2016. Companies Rules 2014, which has specified list of companies in which maintenance of cost record is prescribed under section 148 of the Act. Auditor is not required to undertake detailed examination of cost records or comment on cost audit. We are required to check the compliance with Companies Act, check maintenance and board completion of cost records. Where cost audit is applicable to the company, the auditor may obtain a copy of cost audit report of immediately preceding year and note any qualifications or comments in the cost audit report. This is our job. Cost records have not been maintained or are not prima facie complete, it will be necessary for the auditor to make a suitable comment in his report. Where maintenance of cost records has not been specified for the company, this clause will not be applicable and the auditor may report accordingly. We have to report under this clause only when cost audit are applicable to the company as per Companies Act 2013. Moving to clause 7, regular in depositing undisputed statutory dues. Whether the company is regular in depositing undisputed statutory dues, including goods and service tax, provident fund, employee state insurance, income tax, sales tax, service tax, duty of customs, duty of excise, value added tax, cess, and any other statutory dues to the appropriate authorities, and if not, the extent of the arrears of outstanding statutory dues as on the last day of the financial year concerned for a period of more than 6 months from the date they become payable shall be indicated. This means 6 months से ज़्यादा जो भी dues हैं statutory dues, we have to report all those dues under this clause. The auditor is required to state the extent of arrears of outstanding statutory dues, including interest and penalty, as on the last day of the financial year concerned for a period of more than 6 months from the date they become payable. The intention of the government in this clause is to ascertain how regular the company is in depositing the statutory dues with the appropriate authorities. Examples of statutory dues would include municipal taxes, TDS, fees payable to licensing authority in respect of business being carried on under license granted by an authority. In case of GST, where the vendor has not shown the amount of GST tax paid to him in his statement return, but the company has appropriate justification for considering those payments made as input tax credit in the books and adjusted the same in books against its GST liability, same shall be considered as statutory dues paid on due date. This means सामने वाले ने हमको आईटीसी नहीं दिया, बट वी हैव क्लेम्ड द आईटीसी. This will be considered that we have paid the tax on the due date. There is no delay from our side. Obligation to pay a statutory due is created or arises out of a statute rather than being based on an independent contractual or legal relationship. Example, dividend. Unclaimed dividend to be transferred to specified fund account is a statutory due. Since dividend once declared is required to be paid as per law, it is a statutory due. Due date is the date after stay expires in case authority granted stay. Clause 7 has part B, two parts. We discuss part A, now part B. Where statutory dues referred to in subclause A have not been deposited on account of any dispute, then the amount involved and the forum where dispute is pending shall be mentioned. A mere representation to the concerned department shall not be treated as disputes. There has been a revision as compared to CARO 2016. In CARO 2016, only certain specific tax statutory dues were to be reported. Now the reference of clause 7A is given for reporting of disputed tax statutory dues. Under this clause, we have to report on amounts involved, year, and the forum where dispute is pending shall be mentioned. Show cause notice is not a sign of disputed demand. Even show cause come demand notice is not a demand until show cause proceeding is not completed. शो कॉज नोटिस कभी भी भेज सकता है डिपार्टमेंट. अगर उनको भी कोई डाउट होता है तो उसको क्लेरिफाई करने के लिए दे सेंड अस शो कॉज नोटिस. सो शो कॉज नोटिस इज नॉट अ डिस्प्यूटेड डिमांड. Tax demands that have been set aside are clearly not dues. It is possible that in respect of same nature of statutory dues, there may be more than one dispute pertaining to different periods for which appeals might have been filed separately. Even if it had not been provided for in accounts, it would have to be reported as long as it is not deposited. हम अकाउंट्स में वही चीज़ रिपोर्ट करते हैं जिसके प्रोविजंस बनाते हैं. तो अगर कोई चीज़ नहीं भी रिपोर्ट हुई भी, वी हैव टू रिपोर्ट अंडर कारो. In case where the amount under the dispute is pending for an appeal to be filed and the time limit for filing the appeal has lapsed, the disputed amount would become a statutory due. There may be a situation where the status of litigations outstanding as at the year end may change on account of decisions given under any other law. Example, IBC Code 2016. The auditor may review and consider those developments and ensure that the appropriate treatment has been given to the disputed dues. हमको हर लॉ का इफेक्ट देखना पड़ेगा, जो भी हमारी कंटिंजेंट लाइबिलिटी आ रही है उस पर, और उसके हिसाब से ही रिपोर्ट करना है अगर वो स्टैट्यूटरी ड्यू रहता है तो. Moving to clause 8, transactions not
So
recorded.
basically, this last clause is like they are giving the example of IBC. तो जो ही IBC में अगर कोई particular matter चला जाता है, तो then it is basically the prerogative of the insolvency professional also that how to actually settle all those dues in accordance with the IBC 2016. So then auditor need to mention कि साहब ये statutory dues payment तो नहीं हुए हैं, but this is the reason because already there is insolvency professional in picture, and now all these payments will be governed according to the IBC 2016. Therefore, the payments have not been made, or whatever is the status according to the IBC laws. तो ये आपको देना होगा. Yes.
Yes.
So various points are being explained. They are self-explanatory. One need to consider all these aspects when they are reporting under this clause. Yes, Purvika, continue.
Yes.
So this unrecorded income is again a different clause, which was not there in the earlier CARO. So one need to understand this clause in detail. Yes.
Yes. This is new clause as stated by sir. Clause 8, transaction not recorded in the books of accounts have been surrendered or disclosed as income during the year. Whether any transaction not recorded in the books of accounts has been surrendered or disclosed as income during the year in the tax assessments under Income Tax Act 1961. If so, whether previously unrecorded income has been properly recorded in the books of accounts during the year. Where the addition is made by income tax authorities and the company has disputed such additions, reporting under this clause is not applicable. The auditor is required to review all the tax assessments completed during the year under audit. The auditor is also required to review the tax assessments completed subsequent to the balance sheet date but prior to the signing of the auditor's report. So we have to consider all the tax assessment in our period. The auditor need to evaluate whether the surrendered or disclosed income is required to be classified as extraordinary items, keeping in view the requirement of AS 5. Such surrender or disclosure of income also results in change in level of risk assessed by the auditor in accordance with requirement of SA 315, identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding of the entity and its environment. एज पर ऐसे 315 इट इज़ पॉसिबल कि हमने कोई और मटीरियलिटी लेवल सेट किया था बट जब हमने ये केसेस वगैरह देखे तो हमारा लेवल चेंज हो सकता है. Clause 9, loans taken by the company. Subclause A, whether the company has defaulted in the repayment of loans or other borrowings or in the payment of interest thereon to any lender. If yes,
Purvika, come back to the earlier slide regarding undisclosed income.
Yes, sir.
So, very important clause, particularly from the perspective of the companies where suppose any searches are being carried out, any survey has been carried out, and during those searches and survey, the companies have surrendered certain income to the income tax department, or survey and searches under GST laws, and during that they have confirmed that yes, there are certain certain income, certain sales which are recorded outside the books of accounts. So here basically there are implications, particularly in this particular clause, as well as the clause related to the fraud. So suppose a company and particular auditor, in accordance with the requirement of SA 315, as well as your essay on fraud, that is, I think, which is the essay number 340, related to the assessment of fraud. So basically, and then section 447 of the company law, which describes the definition of fraud, and relevant reporting under section 143(12) of the Companies Act, wherein auditor is required to report it in accordance with the section 143(12) to the board of directors, and if specified limits are if fraud is above the specified limits, then to the central government. So there is a set process which we can discuss some other day. So the point is, क्या जो डायरेक्टर्स हैं या जिन्होंने आउटसाइड बुक्स ऑफ सेल करी है, क्या वो कंपनी के साथ कोई फ्रॉड कर रहे हैं? ये एक सवाल आता है, क्योंकि उन्होंने आउटसाइड बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स कुछ सेल्स रिकॉर्ड करी हुई है और उस पैसे को उन्होंने डाइवर्ट भी किया है, कंपनी में लेकर भी नहीं आए हैं, क्योंकि कंपनी कैन अदरवाइज डू नॉट हैव एनी डिफरेंट सेट ऑफ बुक्स फॉर सच टाइप ऑफ ट्रांजैक्शंस व्हिच आर बीइंग डन बाय द मैनेजमेंट एंड डायरेक्टर्स ऑफ द कंपनी. तो ये भी एक बहुत बड़ा सवाल है जिसको हमें एड्रेस करना होता है while reporting under this clause as well as clause related to the fraud. So and reporting under 143(12). तो ये जब कभी भी इस तरीके का कोई आप ऑडिट डील कर रहे हो और ऐसा कोई चीज आपके सामने आया है, तो you should properly examine the facts and इस केस में हमें किस तरीके से डील करना है, so far as reporting is concerned. Yes.
Now, clause 9, loans taken by the company. Whether the company has defaulted in repayment of loans or other borrowings or in payment of interest thereon to any lender. If yes, the period and the amount of default to be reported as per the format below. We have to report in this format only: nature of borrowing including debt securities, name of lender, amount not paid on due date, whether principal or interest which company has defaulted, number of days delays or unpaid, or remarks if any. Discrepancies in loan taken by the company, the reporting requirement for audit. details as per the above format in respect of all the borrowings, debentures, bonds, etc. This requirement is for reporting all the borrowings, including unsecured loans from private parties, NBFCs, etc., along with the due date and when it was paid. Details of all the penal interest charged by the banks or financial institutions or other lenders during the financial year April to March, along with the reasons why the same was charged. That is for delayed submission of stock statements, या फिर delay in payment of installments of interest or principal, etc. Clause B, whether the company is a declared willful defaulter by any bank or
Purvika,
financial. Yes,
so
sir.
yeah, come back to the previous slides. So earlier, basically, this clause was there related to the default in repayment of loan to banks and financial institutions. Now, the provisions are also applicable if there is a default in making payment to the private parties, to the NBFCs, to other loan providers also, apart from the banks and financial institutions. So, this is one aspect which one need to see. And we need to also see if that default is there within the year. अगर आपने सपोज 90 दिन में आपने पेमेंट सपोज जून में करना है और वो पेमेंट आपने जून की जगह जुलाई में किया, 10 दिन डिले किया, तो वो भी आपको रिपोर्ट करना है, बिकॉज आपका पेमेंट आउटस्टैंडिंग था, ईयर एंड पे तो वो आउटस्टैंडिंग नहीं है, बट देयर इज ए डिले इन मेकिंग द पेमेंट ऑफ प्रिंसिपल एज वेल एज इंटरेस्ट. तो आपको जब कभी भी हम लोन ट्रांजेक्शन्स की रीपेमेंट देखते हैं, तो आपको ये देखना पड़ेगा कि वो सारे रीपेमेंट्स जो भी हुए हैं वो टाइमली जो लैंडर है उसको टाइमली हुए या नहीं हुए हैं थ्रू आउट द ईयर, नॉट ओनली at the year end. Throughout the year, it has to be examined. Yes, next. Clause B.
Yes, sir. Now, clause B, whether the company is a declared willful defaulter by any bank or financial institutions or other lender. Reporting requirement for audit. Declaration from the company whether the company is a declared willful defaulter by any bank or financial institutions or other lender. A certificate from the company's banker that whether the company has been declared as willful defaulter by any bank or financial institutions or other lender. Banks and financial institutions are required to submit the list of suit filed accounts of willful defaulters of rupees 25 lakh and above every month to the four credit information companies. Now, clause C, whether term loans were applied for the purpose for which the loans were obtained. If not, the amount of loans so diverted and the purpose for which it is used may be reported. Amounts diverted and the purpose to be disclosed. Previous year term loans utilized during current year also covered. Temporary investment of surplus funds to reduce cost of capital allowed. It may happen that the company might have acquired improved version or model of asset as against the assets for which the loan has been sanctioned. In such cases, it should not be construed that the loan has not been applied for the purpose for which it was obtained. This means we can buy improved version of the asset. It is not necessary we have to get the same asset for which the loan was granted. Clause D, whether funds raised on short-term basis has been utilized for long-term purposes. If yes, the nature and amount to be indicated. Clause E, whether company has taken
So,
any.
yes, so both clause C and D are basically related to the diversion of fund, wherein the purpose of obtaining the loan is different and actual utilization is different. तो ये आपको जब कभी भी उस पर्टिकुलर ईयर के अंदर कोई लोन आया हुआ है, तो आपको हमेशा ये देखना होगा कि जो कैश फ्लोज आ रहे हैं लोन से, तो कहीं ऐसा तो नहीं है कि उसका पर्पस जो है वो किसी और पर्पस के लिए था और कहीं और आपने उसको डाइवर्ट कर दिया. और क्लॉज डी जो खासकर है, पर्टिकुलरली सपोज आपने वर्किंग कैपिटल लोन ले लिया एंड दैट वर्किंग कैपिटल लोन इज यूटिलाइज फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ परचेजिंग एनी प्लांट एंड मशीनरी, for purchasing any other fixed assets. So basically, the fixed assets and plant and machinery are utilization is always for utilization for a long-term purpose, not for a short-term purpose. तो आपको ये भी देखना होगा कि जो वर्किंग कैपिटल लोन्स हैं, जो सीसी लिमिट्स हैं, इनका यूटिलाइजेशन कहीं लॉन्ग टर्म पर्पस के लिए तो कंपनी ने नहीं कर रखा है. सो इट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट to correlate the receipt of fund with the payments कि उसके ultimately payments कहाँ हो रहे हैं। और कई बार मान लो ऐसा हो सकता है कि साहब जैसे मैंने फिक्स्ड एसेट्स किसी और से एक मैंने ब्रिज लोन लेके और मैंने फिक्स्ड एसेट्स एक्वायर कर ली, है ना, और फिर बाद में जब मेरे पास में पेमेंट आया तो पेमेंट आने के लिए कंडीशन ये थी कि साहब इसका यूटिलाइजेशन मैं फिक्स्ड एसेट्स में करूंगा, बट आई हैव रीपेड दैट ब्रिज लोन। तो yes, this can be said to be the utilization of property, plant and equipment only, कि भाई मैंने जब तक मेरे पास में जो लॉन्ग टर्म लोन सैंक्शन नहीं आता है तब तक मैंने से 90 दिन के लिए या 3 महीने के लिए 30 दिन के लिए मैंने एक ब्रिज लोन ले रखा है, एंड आई हैव प्रॉपर्ली इन्फॉर्म्ड इट टू द बैंक ऑल्सो, आई विल आई विल रीपे इट टू द रेस्पेक्टिव लोन प्रोवाइडर। तो ये सब चीजें आपको बेसिकली एक्चुअल ट्रांजेक्शन का ऑडिट करते हो तो ये सारे सवाल आपके मन में आने चाहिए, एंड देन यू शुड एक्चुअली एग्जामिन considering the facts and circumstances of each of the case. Next.
Now, clause E, whether the company has taken any funds from any entity or person on account of or to meet the obligation of its subsidiary, associate, or joint ventures. If so, details thereof with nature of such transactions and the amount in each case are to be reported. Covers loans, advance, investments. If sufficient cash from operations and investment activities exist in parent company, reporting may be avoided. Clause F states whether the company has raised loans during the year on the pledge of securities held in its subsidiaries, joint venture, or associate companies. If so, give details thereof and also report if the company has defaulted in repayment of such loans raised. The auditor should obtain schedule of all the loans raised during the year. It is clarified that this clause does not specify the lender, and therefore the reporting under this clause will include loans taken during the year from any lender. Moving to clause 10. 10A, initial public offer or further public offer, including debt.
Purvika, come back to the previous slide.
This one, sir?
Yeah. So whether the company has raised loan during the year on pledge of securities held in subsidiaries, joint ventures और associate companies. So ये सब को एग्जामिन करने के लिए आपको जो भी आरओसी का रिकॉर्ड है, जो भी रेस्पेक्टिव फॉर्म्स हैं आरओसी के, उनसे भी आपको एग्जामिन करना चाहिए कि साहब कोई पर्टिकुलर सिक्योरिटीज जो सब्सिडरीज के अंदर है उसको तो प्लेस नहीं किया हुआ है, उसको तो फॉर द पर्पज ऑफ ऑब्टेनिंग एनी सच लोन्स। तो ये बेसिकली जितने भी आरओसी रिकॉर्ड्स हैं उनको भी हमें प्रॉपर्ली एग्जामिन करना चाहिए, so that if there is any breach of terms and conditions with reference to the obtaining these loans, तो वो भी यहाँ पे प्रॉपर्ली आप रिपोर्ट कर सकते हो, है ना, and then funds from any entity or person on account of or to meet the obligations of its subsidiaries, associates और joint venture। तो ये भी आपको देखना होगा कि सब जो दूसरी ग्रुप कंपनीज हैं उनके लिए तो पैसा कहीं कंपनी ने नहीं ले रखा है ना। यस, कंटिन्यू।
Clause 10A, initial public offer or further public offer, including debt instruments, whether money raised by way of initial public offer or further public offer, including debt instruments, during the year were applied for the purposes for which those are raised. If not, the details together with delay or default and subsequent rectification, if any, as may be applicable, be reported. In case the company has made an initial public offer or further public offer, including debt instruments, the auditor is required to report upon the disclosure of end use of money by the management in financial statements. Reporting on application of money raised for purpose which was stated in prospectus. Currently, there is no legal requirement under the Act to disclose the end use of money raised by initial public offer or further public offer in financial statements. The company, however, makes such a disclosure in board's report. हमको खाली डिस्क्लोजर बोर्ड रिपोर्ट में देना है, फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स के लिए अभी कोई रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है। Clause 10B, preferential allotment or private placement of shares or convertible debentures. Whether the company has made any preferential allotment or private placement of shares or convertible debentures during the year, and if so, whether the requirements of Section 42 and Section 62 of Companies Act 2013 has been complied with and funds raised has been used for the purpose for which the funds were raised. If not, provide details in respect of amount involved and the nature of non-compliance. Now, Chair will continue from clause 11 to clause 15.
So, clause
Come back to
11.
the previous slide.
Yes.
Yes, preferential allotment or private placement of shares or convertible debentures. Yeah, I think it has been covered. The section 42 as well as 62 of the Companies Act. तो ये भी आपको पूरा उनके ऊपर कमांड होना चाहिए कि जब कभी भी प्रेफरेंशियल अलॉटमेंट हो रहा है तो ये पर्टिकुलर सेक्शंस की क्या क्या रिक्वायरमेंट है ना, और देन यू नीड टू एक्चुअली असेस वेदर दोज रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैव बीन कंप्लीटेड. कंटिन्यू.
Now moving on to clause number 11, that is fraud by the company or any fraud of the company. Whether any fraud by the company or any fraud of the company has been noticed or reported during the year. If yes, the nature and the amount involved is to be indicated. This clause requires the auditor to report whether any fraud has been noticed or reported either on the company or by the company. मतलब सिर्फ company अगर fraud या तो कर रही है या फिर उसके साथ fraud हो रहा है, in both the cases you are supposed to report under this clause. And this clause covers fraud by anybody and is not limited to frauds by the officers or employees of the company. The auditor should examine the reports of the internal auditor with a view to ascertain whether any fraud has been reported or noticed by the internal auditor. Internal auditor के report से बहुत help मिलती है because the internal auditor has in-depth gone through all the ledgers and all the working procedure of the company. So this will definitely help with us to ascertain the fraud. Now, this clause 11 has a second part, that is reporting under subsection 12 of section 143 of the Companies Act. Whether any report under subsection 12 of section 143 of the Companies Act has been filed by the auditors in form Form 84 has been prescribed under Rule 33 of the Companies Act with the central government. अगर इस फॉर्म के अंडर कोई भी रिपोर्टिंग हुई टू सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट देन द ऑडिटर इज सपोज्ड टू रिपोर्ट अंडर दिस क्लॉज. द रिपोर्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट अंडर दिस क्लॉज would also apply to situations where during the year the preceding auditor of the company has reported under this clause. In case of fraud involving less than specified amount, the auditor shall report the matter to the audit committee. Now, section 143, subsection 12 of section 143 is basically prescribes that if an auditor of the company, in the course of performance of his duties as an auditor, has reason to believe that an offense of fraud involving an amount of 1 crore or more is being or has been committed against the company by its officers or employees, the auditor shall report the matter to the board or the audit committee immediately, but not less than 2 days of his knowledge of the fraud, seeking their reply or observation within 45 days. On receipt of such reply, the auditor shall forward his report in Form 84 and reply on his comments to the central government within 15 days from the date of receipt of such reply or observation. Basically, अगर 84 के प्रोसीजर है ये कि 84 ऐसे फाइल होता है, अगर रिसीविंग ऑडिटर ने 84 में कोई रिपोर्ट सबमिट की है, देन वी आर सपोज्ड टू रिपोर्ट अंडर दिस क्लॉज नंबर 11B. Now moving on to clause number 11C, that is whistleblower complaints. Whether the auditor has considered whistleblower complaints, if any, received in the year by the company. So we are supposed to report all the list of the whistleblower complaints that have been received by the company during the year, along with how same has been addressed by the company and its impact on the financial statements. Section 177 of the Act requires the following class of company to establish a vigil mechanism. Matlab, these three companies is mandatory to establish a vigil mechanism. The three companies are every listed company which accept deposits from the public, and companies which have borrowed money from banks or PFIs in excess of 50 crores. Or there's another thing that the companies, if not covered above three conditions, they can voluntarily establish this mechanism. The auditor is not required to consider whistleblower complaints pertaining to earlier years while reporting under this clause. Means you just have to focus on the current year complaints which have been received by the company and not consider the earlier complaints. This was about clause number 11. Now, clause number 12, that is, whether the Nidhi company has complied with the net owned funds to deposits in the ratio of 1:2 to meet out the liability. B, whether the Nidhi company is maintaining 10% unencumbered term deposits as specified in the Nidhi rules to meet out the liability. And the C, whether there has been any default in repayment of interest on deposits or repayment thereof for any period. So every Nidhi company within a period of 1 year from the date of its incorporation ensure that it has not less than 200 members, net owned funds of 10 lakh or more, unencumbered term deposits of not less than 10%, and ratio of net owned fund to deposits of not more than 1.2. Auditors should examine the documents such as Form NDH3 filed with the Nidhi company half-yearly, containing the terms and conditions of the deposits. This examination would enable the auditor in verifying the amount and due dates of payments mentioned in the documents. So NDH3, the NDH3 form contains basically three details. First detail among them is details of all deposits, including its movement. B, details of the loans, and C, financial summary such as the ratio of net owned funds to deposits. Basically, वो तीनों NDH3 contains all the three things जिसके ऊपर हमें reporting करनी होती है. So we should definitely check the NDH3 form filed by the company, which is half yearly. The auditor should report incorporating the following details as of the balance sheet date. Any shortfall in the ratio of netted funds, that is 1:2. In case of shortfall with regard to minimum amount of 10% as unencumbered term deposits, or any default of either payment of interest or deposit of repayment or both. The auditor may come across a situation where there can be disputes between the Nidhi company and the depositor on certain issues to repayment. In such situations, the auditor should consider prevailing terms and conditions only. So this was about the clause number 12. Clause number 13 deals about sections 177 and 188. Whether all the transactions with the related parties are in compliance with section 177 and 188 of the Companies Act, where applicable, and the details have been disclosed in the financial statement. अगर हमने 177 और 188 की क्लॉज का कोई भी वो कुछ फॉलो नहीं किया compliance, then they are supposed to report in this clause. Section 177 states transactions entered into by the company with related party needs to be approved by the audit committee, and section 188 states the conditions for the company to enter into certain transactions with related party like sale, purchase of goods and material, leasing, selling or buying of property, rendering of any services, appointment to any office or place of profit in the company, its subsidiary, etc. Reporting requirements are as under. The auditor should obtain a list of companies, firms, or other parties, the particulars of which are required to be entered in the register maintained in Section 189. The auditor may also decide to obtain written representation that specific party transactions does not involve undisclosed side agreements. Approval of board not required for arm's length transactions. The auditor should also perform the following procedures in respect of completeness of this information. अगर हमें कुछ भी पता करना है इन सब के बारे में तो वी शुड स्पेसिफिकली रिव्यू आवर वर्किंग पेपर फॉर द प्रायर इयर्स इन द नेम ऑफ द नोन कंपनीज. जो पुरानी कंपनीज के नाम हमने वर्किंग पेपर्स में है उसको रिव्यू कर सकते हैं. रिव्यू द एंटिटीज प्रोसीजर फॉर आइडेंटिफिकेशन ऑफ द कंपनीज व्हिच आर रिक्वायर्ड टू बी एंटर्ड इन द रजिस्टर. This was about clause number 13. Now clause number 14, internal audit. Clause number 14, subclause A states whether the company has an internal audit system commensurate with the size and nature of its business, and the B states whether the report of the internal auditor for the period and the audit were considered by the auditors. The management of the company has to demonstrate and inform the auditors in writing that how the system is commensurate with the size and nature of the company business. मतलब जो भी internal audit का system हम follow कर रहे हैं, that should be in accordance with the size and nature of the business. The management has to provide the auditor the reports of the internal auditors for the period under audit. The internal audit may or may not be the employee of the company. Auditor कोई भी होता है. It's not necessary कि independent person ही होना चाहिए. Now, There is some applicability that certain companies have to appoint an internal auditor. They are basically every listed company, unlisted public company having paid-up share capital 50 crores or more, turnover of 200 crore or more, loans and liabilities exceeding 100 crores or more, deposit 25 crore or more, and every private company having turnover of 200 crore or more and outstanding loan and borrowing exceeding 100 crore or more. Means all these companies fulfilling all the conditions have to appoint internal auditor. Now, clause number 15, that is non-cash transactions with directors or persons connected with him. Whether the company has entered into any non-cash transactions with directors or persons connected with him, and if so, whether the provision of section 192 have been complied with.
ये डाला मैसेज कहते हैं those who left should join back, class is not over yet. और उनमें से मैं भी थी क्योंकि मेरा लैपटॉप पे शिफ्ट हुई है स्काई ट्रैक अरे उस पे खुला हुआ है उस पे खोल ले लैपटॉप में
The reporting the reporting requirement
हेलो
आप म्यूट करो अपने आप को और क्लास पे ध्यान दो। बधाई
यस सर
So clause number 15 basically has two parts. The first part requires the auditor to report on whether the company has entered into any non-cash transactions with the directors or any person connected with him. Basically, this clause is about non-cash transaction with directors. अगर फर्स्ट पार्ट में डायरेक्टर्स या फिर किसी अदर पर्सन के साथ आपके ट्रांजैक्शंस है नॉन कैश, तो यू आर सपोज्ड टू रिपोर्ट. The second part of this clause requires the auditor to report whether the provision of section 192 of the Act have been complied with. Therefore, the second part of this clause becomes reportable only if the answer to the first clause is in affirmative. The liability created in respect of the asset transfer transaction books cannot be termed as non-cash transactions. So this was all about clause number 15. Now Purvika will take over to the rest of the class, to the rest of the clauses.
Okay, clause 16. Whether the company is required to be registered under section 45 IA of Reserve Bank of India Act 1934, and if so, whether the registration has been obtained. The registration is required where the company is engaged in the business of non-banking financial institution. NBFCs are doing functions similar to banks. However, there exists difference between banks and NBFCs. NBFC lend and make investments, and hence their activities are akin to that of banks. However, there are few differences which are given below. NBFC cannot accept demand deposits, but bank can. NBFC do not form part of the payment and settlement system and cannot issue checks drawn on itself. Deposit insurance facility of deposit insurance and credit guarantee corporation is not available to depositors of NBFCs, unlike in case of banks. So these are the few differences between NBFC and banks. The financial statements should be examined to ascertain whether the company's financial assets constitute more than 50% of the total assets and income from financial assets constitute more than 50% of the gross income. Whether the company has obtained the registration as NBFC, if not, the reason should be sought from the management and documented. Basically, we have to look for more than 50% of the assets, whether they are financial assets, and the income more than 50% is coming from financial source or not.
So this is called basically a 50-50 test. So suppose any company is having giving loans also to the other parties and taking interest from these parties, and apart from that, the company is having its other assets like plant and machinery, debtors, and all these assets. So the clause says that suppose total assets, say total assets is say 10 crore rupees, or out of that more than 5 crore are loans given to the other parties, number one, and then the total interest income is basically again more than the 50% of the gross income. So if this is so, then there is requirement by RBI कि सब इसको as an NBFC register कराना होगा. And if it is not being done, then it is required to be reported over here. तो ऐसा जनरली कुछ केसेस में ऐसा होता है कि सपोज एक पर्टिकुलर कंपनी के पास में पैसा पड़ा है, बट एट द सेम टाइम उसका जो दूसरा बिजनेस है उसने अपनी प्लांट एंड मशीनरी वगैरह नहीं खरीद रखा है, और या फिर उसको बाद में करना है, बाद में उसको परचेज करना है, या इट हैज डिफरेंट प्लान्स एज टू दी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग एंड ऑल अदर प्रोसेसेस. तो इन बिटवीन कंपनीज क्या करती है कि किसी और को एडवांस दे दिया, किसी और को पैसा दे दिया, है ना. इट इज नॉट इनटू द एफडीआर. अगर एफडीआर में होता तो एफडीआर इज नॉट कंसीडर्ड एज पार्ट ऑफ दिस 50-50 टेस्ट, क्योंकि एफडीआर इज बेसिकली फंड अवेलेबल विद द कंपनी व्हिच हैज बीन इन्वेस्टेड विद द बैंक्स. बट एट द सेम टाइम सपोज ये पैसा किसी और को दे रखा है, और जितना भी पैसा है और जो दूसरी एसेट्स है वो बहुत कम है, वो 20% ही है या 10% ही है ही नहीं. तो ऐसे केस में ऑल प्रोबेबिलिटीज कि कंपनी जो है वो एनबीएफसी के क्राइटेरिया में फॉलो है. एंड आरबीआई बेसिकली प्रोहिबिट कि अब इस तरीके की कोई भी कंपनी अगर मोर देन 50% उसकी एसेट है तो वो लोन देने का काम नहीं कर सकती. तो one has to examine it very carefully, particularly in case of the companies which do not have other assets like property, plant and equipment or such assets. तो कहीं ऐसा नहीं है कि ये 50-50 criteria में follow होती है इस तरीके की कंपनी. और ऐसा है तो फिर उनको एनबीएफसी का रजिस्ट्रेशन लेना होता है, और अदरवाइज इट विल बी ट्रीटेड एज वायलेशन ऑफ RBI guidelines and rules related to the NBFCs, law related to the NBFCs. Continue.
Okay. Moving to clause 17, cash losses in the financial year and immediately preceding financial year. Clause states whether the company has incurred cash losses in the financial year and in immediately preceding financial year. If so, state the amount of cash losses. Given the objective of this clause, net profit or loss after tax would require adjustment for non-cash items such as deferred tax income expenses for determination of cash losses, etc. This clause is applicable to all companies. This clause requires the auditor to report whether the company has incurred cash losses during the period covered by the audit report and in the immediately preceding financial year. If so, the auditor is required to report amount of cash loss for the period covered under audit and immediately preceding financial year. It may be noted that the cash flow statement also presents cash flows from operating activities. However, it may not be appropriate to consider such cash flows from the specific and limited purpose of this clause, considering that items such as interest income expenses are also relevant for determination of cash losses. This is the difference between cash flow statement and the cash losses which this clause is referring to. This clause includes interest income and expenses. The above mentioned amount of net.
हाँ, एक बार आप कंप्लीट कर दीजिए. I will have questions from all participants.
The above mentioned amount of net profit loss after tax should, however, not be adjusted for items of expenses of contingent nature, such as claims not acknowledged as due by the company.
Yes. So, can anybody, rather all participants, please reply in the chat box. How we will determine the cash losses? मतलब जैसे जो प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस जो भी आपका बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स में आ रहा है उसमें हम क्या क्या ऐड करेंगे, या क्या हम उसमें से रिड्यूस करेंगे सो दैट वी कैन एक्चुअली डिटरमाइन द कैश लॉस टू द कंपनी. यस, अभी जैन आप बताइए.
हेलो.
हाँ
हाँ.
नहीं, ये
यस सर, हम जो भी
चिराग
नेट
लिख रहे हैं बाय एडजस्टिंग नॉन कैश आइटम्स, तो वो तो इसी में लिखा हुआ है. व्हाट आर दोस नॉन कैश आइटम्स? वो तो इसमें लिख दिया इन्होंने। हाँ ये सभी
यस सर, जैसे नॉन कैश आइटम फॉर एग्जांपल अपना डेप्रिसिएशन हो गया, और जो भी अपने डिफर्ड टैक्स के एक्सपेंसेस अपन करते हैं वो नॉन कैश, प्रोविजन फॉर टैक्सेशन,
करेक्ट।
तो ये सब
So,
अपन एडजस्ट करके और अपने कैश लॉसेस पे अराइव हो जाए।
बट क्या इन्वेंटरी राइट ऑफ अगर अपन ने कर दी तो वो भी कैश फ्लो है या वो क्या है?
सॉरी सर।
इन्वेंटरी राइट ऑफ आपने किया तो वेदर दैट इज कैश फ्लो या वो कैश फ्लोस में से हमें हटा के वापस ऐड करना है इन्वेंटरी राइट ऑफ?
नहीं सर, नॉन कैश ही है वो भी।
वो एक्चुअल लॉस तो हो ही गया ना आपको। अब उससे आपको कभी कैश वापस थोड़ी आने वाला जो आपने इन्वेंटरी राइट ऑफ कर दिया, एडजस्ट कर दिया।
पर सर उससे अपन को कोई कैश रिसीव या पे नहीं करना पड़ा ना।
Correct. So we need to examine this aspect also, and then see whether there is any cash loss or not. Suppose आपने कोई provision किया हुआ है, कोई impairment किया हुआ है, property plant and equipment का, so that is also not part of the cash loss. है ना? या आपने अगर मान लीजिए revaluation किया और उसकी वजह से revaluation gain आपकी बुक्स में आ रहा है, तो वो gain को भी वापस आपको एडजस्ट करना पड़ेगा। आपने कोई मान लीजिए कि आजकल बेस्ड फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स के अंदर कुछ फाइनेंशियल एसेट जो है दे आर बीइंग क्लासिफाइड एज फेयर वैल्यू थ्रू प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस। तो वो प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस के अंदर अगर मान लीजिए कि फेयर वैल्यू थ्रू ओसीआई, तो वो वाला आइटम, वो गेन्स जो है या वो लॉसेस जो है वो भी कैश लॉस का पार्ट नहीं होंगे, जबकि वो बुक्स के अंदर प्रॉफिट का पार्ट हो रहे हैं। तो ये सारी चीजें एग्जामिन आप करके और फिर ये देखना होगा कि वेदर देयर इज कैश लॉस और नॉट। So we should have a proper working in our working papers that yes, what is the exact cash profit or cash loss which is there in the books of accounts, and then if there is a cash loss, then it is required to be reported in CARO. Yes, continue.
Moving to clause 18, resignation of statutory auditors during the year. Whether there has been any resignation of statutory auditors during the year, if so, whether the auditor has taken into consideration the issues, objections, or the concern raised by the outgoing auditors. This clause is applicable where new auditor is appointed during the year to fill a casual vacancy caused by the resignation of the auditor created in the office of previous auditor. The incoming auditor should also consider the audit evidences obtained during the audit while performing audit procedures under SA 500 audit evidence. The auditor who has resigned from the company to file within a period of 30 days from the date of resignation a statement in Form ADT3, Notice of Resignation by the auditor with ROC, indicating the reasons and other facts as may be relevant with regards to his resignation. ऑडिटर को फॉर्म ADT3 के अंदर आरओसी के पास फाइल करना पड़ेगा अपना रेजिग्नेशन, अदरवाइज ही वुड बी पैनलाइज्ड. The incoming auditor should also carry out the following additional audit procedures: reading minutes of board meetings, inquiring from the management, and reading the communications to audit committee. Example, audit committee presentation to determine if there is any matter communicated to TCWG. कोई भी बात अगर ऑडिटर ने बताई हो व्हाई ही इज रिजाइनिंग टू TCWG, वो सब हमको इंक्वायर करना होगा इफ वी आर अपॉइंटेड एज न्यू ऑडिटर. Exercise his professional judgment while evaluating the reasons for resignation.
Yes, so this is very relevant clause. So basically, if we see the financial year 2021 as well as 21-22, lot many resignations by the auditors have taken place in the recent times. और काफी relevant reasons उन्होंने कोट किए हुए हैं, है ना? कई बार because of the non-cooperation of the company, the auditor may have resigned, or because of some other reasons also the auditors have resigned. So इन्होंने लिखा है कि you need to consider as an auditor whether the auditor has taken into consideration the issues, objections, or concerns raised by the outgoing auditors. तो सपोज ऑडिटर्स ने कुछ कम्युनिकेशन हुआ है तो गवर्नेंस है ना, इसमें क्या है कि देयर इज ए गाइडेंस ऑफ इंस्टीट्यूट ऑल्सो, देयर इज ए स्पेसिफिक गाइड which deals with the resignation of the auditors which has been issued by the ICI, and their guide says that as and when such resignation is there, so before the auditor decides for the resignations, and suppose there are certain issues, so before taking the decision of resignations, the auditor has to raise all those issues to the those are with the governance, like audit committee in case of the listed companies, and that audit committee has to basically deal with all the issues which are being raised by the statutory auditors. और अगर उनको properly audit committee ने deal with नहीं किया, then auditor can actually resign. This is one thing. And then there are, if it is the case of listed companies, then there are guidelines of the SEBI कि वो कब resign कर सकता है, and then there are certain limits कि जब कभी भी मान लीजिए कि एक particular quarter end हो गया, तो उस quarter end होने के बाद में till results are not published for that quarter, the auditor cannot resign. Similarly, once year is ended, then auditor cannot resign until the result of that year are published. So these SEBI guidelines are also there. तो ऑडिटर ने वो भी गाइडलाइंस फॉलो करी या नहीं करी, ये भी करने को देखना होता है अंडर दिस पर्टिकुलर क्लॉज. सो होल ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ रिपोर्टिंग अंडर दिस क्लॉज इज कि सर कोई भी ऑडिटर केवल ऐसा नहीं हो कि सिंपली रिजाइन कर दे, और though there are certain serious issues in the companies, अगर वो serious issues हैं और उनकी वजह से ऑडिटर ने रिजाइन किया है, तो वो सारे issues पब्लिक डोमेन पे आने चाहिए. वो सारे issues रेस्पेक्टिव जो भी गवर्निंग बॉडी है, जो भी ऑडिट कमिटी है, बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स हैं, उनके पास भी आने चाहिए. और वो सारे issues जब ऑडिटर अपना रिकमेंडेशन लेटर फाइल करता है ADT 3, तो उसमें भी उनको मेंशन करना चाहिए. तो कोई भी चीज आप छुपा करके नहीं कर सकते हो. दैट इज द होल पर्पस ऑफ दिस प्रोविजन एज वेल एज दिस पर्टिकुलर क्लॉज. और जब भी ऑडिटर आप उस पर्टिकुलर ऑडिट को एक्सेप्ट करते हो, तो जो भी इश्यूज उन्होंने रेज किए हैं प्रीवियस ऑडिटर में, क्या जो कंपनी है उसने उन सारे इश्यूज को जब आपने ऑडिट किया तो उन सारे इश्यूज को डील किया या नहीं किया. तो ये आपका अलग से एक सेपरेट ऑडिट रिपोर्टिंग का पार्ट हो जाएगा. अगर वो सारे रीजन्स आज भी एग्जिस्टेंस में हैं, तो यू नीड टू डील विथ योर ऑडिट रिपोर्ट, you need to deal with such matter in your audit report separately. Yes.
Yes, sir. Next clause, moving to 19th clause. Material uncertainty exists on the date of audit report to meet existing liabilities at balance sheet date due within 1 year. Sorry. On the basis of the financial ratios, aging, and expected dates of realization of financial assets and payment of financial liabilities, other information accompanying the financial statements, the auditor's knowledge of board of directors and management plans, whether the auditor is of the opinion that no material uncertainty exists as on the date of audit report, that company is capable of meeting its liabilities existing at the date of balance sheet as and when they fall due within a period of 1 year from the balance sheet date. Details of any such cash flows, trends, aging ratios that has been prepared by the company or shared by the company with third parties or banks or any stakeholders. What is company's assessment about how company is capable of meeting its liability existing at the date of balance sheet as and when they fall due within a period of 1 year from the balance sheet date. Such assessment need to be provided to us in writing backed by financial ratios, aging, expected dates of realization of financial assets and payment of financial liabilities. Discussion of future plans or projections or business expansion by the BOD, orders in hand, other management plans or other related information. बेसिकली हमको ये सारे रेशियोज जो भी हैं ये सारे मैनेजमेंट से लेने हैं, जो भी मैनेजमेंट ने आगे बैंक्स को प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं और जिनके बेसिस पे उनको लोन्स ग्रांट हुए हैं. Clause 20. amount unspent on other
So this
than
is this is again very important clause. इसमें आपको ये assess करना है कि जो भी ऑडिटर्स की जो भी कंपनी की लाइबिलिटीज हैं, बेसिकली इट इज ए क्लॉज रिलेटेड टू द असेसमेंट ऑफ गोइंग कंसर्न, है ना। तो जो भी कंपनीज की लाइबिलिटीज हैं अगले एक साल में आने वाली, क्या वो लाइबिलिटीज कंपनी पे कर पाएगी या नहीं कर पाएगी। तो एक तरीके से ये हो गया कि अब आपको ऑडिटर में मतलब आर्टिकल्स और चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट और पार्टनर्स इनके साथ साथ में एक एस्ट्रोलॉजर भी हमें रखना पड़ेगा, ताकि हम ये पता कर पाए कि वेदर कंपनी हैज, so this is basically on a lighter side, whether company will be able to repay its debt or not. But at the same time, अपना एक ओवरऑल असेसमेंट, अब मान लीजिए अगले साल जाके और कोई वास्तव में जानबूझ के पेमेंट नहीं करे, तो दैट इज अ डिफरेंट एस्पेक्ट कि वो डाइवर्जन ऑफ फंड्स कर दे और अपने क्रेडिटर्स को पेमेंट नहीं करे। बट एट द सेम टाइम आपको जो भी कंपनीज के फ्यूचर कैश फ्लोज होने वाले हैं with reference to the sales and with reference to other aspect, वो हुए या नहीं हुए, कि आपको या होने वाले कंपनी के पास किस तरीके के ऑर्डर्स हैं, या जो एग्जिस्टिंग कस्टमर्स हैं वेदर कंपनी विल बी एबल टू रिटेन और नॉट, उन कस्टमर्स के कंपनी के पास में सारे अगले साल के भी ऑर्डर्स हैं या नहीं है। सो मेनी from so many point of view, you need to actually examine whether the company will be able to repay its liabilities or not to the all its creditors. एग्जामिन करके ही आपको इस पर्टिकुलर क्लॉज में रिपोर्टिंग करनी है कि कंपनी इज एबल टू मेक द पेमेंट टू देम और नॉट। इसके साथ ही साथ जो स्टैंडर्ड्स ऑन ऑडिटिंग है ऑन गोइंग कंसर्न, that also need to be evaluated कि सब गोइंग कंसर्न की assumptions को भी इन्होंने जो गोइंग कंसर्न से रिलेटेड एस्पेक्ट्स है वो भी यहाँ पे fulfill हो रहे हैं या नहीं हो रहे। तो यस।
Okay, moving to next clause. Clause number 20, subpart A. Amount unspent on
जहाँ कहीं पे भी ऐसे केसेस में, जैसे अपन बात कर रहे थे रिलेटेड कैश लॉसेस, तो अगर कंपनी के कैश लॉसेस हैं और पिछले सालों से भी कंटिन्यू होते हुए आ रहे हैं, so there we have to take a conscious call कि सर ये कैश लॉसेस होते हैं कि क्या कंपनी लायबिलिटीज को पेमेंट कर पाएगी या नहीं कर पाएगी। तो उस कॉल को लेने के लिए भी we need to take the proper assessment from the management. We have to also have our own view with reference to this. और इस पर्टिकुलर ईयर में कंपनीज अपने रिपेमेंट के लिए क्या डिफॉल्ट कर रही थी क्या। तो जैसे अपन बैंक्स एंड फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशंस की बात कर रहे थे कि साहब उनको और जो दूसरे लाइबिलिटीज हैं उनको एक देयर इज अ सेपरेट क्लॉज जो अपन पहले डिस्कस कर रहे थे रिलेटेड टू द रीपेमेंट ऑफ द लाइबिलिटीज। तो सपोज इस साल में वो पेमेंट नहीं हो पा रहे हैं या इस साल में वो पेमेंट डिलेड हो रहे हैं, है ना, जहाँ पेमेंट आज होना था उसकी जगह वो 90 दिन बाद हो रहा है या 6 महीने बाद वो पेमेंट हो रहा है। तो दीज आर ऑल्सो इंडिकेशंस कि साहब ये जब इस साल के अंदर पेमेंट्स लेट हो रहे हैं तो अगले साल हो सकता है देयर मे बी मोर सीवियर सिचुएशन फॉर द कंपनी दैट दे आर नॉट एबल टू पे। तो आप ये सारे फैक्ट्स को भी कंसीडर करिए जो आप दूसरे क्लॉजेस में रिपोर्ट कर रहे हो, कैश क्लॉजेस से रिलेटेड या आपका जो रीपेमेंट ऑफ लायबिलिटी से रिलेटेड, उनके बेसिस पे क्या यहाँ पे भी इस क्लॉज में कुछ रिपोर्टिंग होनी चाहिए क्या। So that is also very important, which one need to assess. Yes.
Okay. This clause states whether, in respect of other than ongoing projects, the company has transferred the unspent amount to a fund specified in Schedule 7 to Companies Act within a period of 6 months of the expiry of financial year in compliance with second proviso to subsection 5 of section 135 of the said Act. The second provision to subsection 5 of section 135 requires that if company fails to spend such amount, the board shall, in its report, specify the reasons for not spending the amount and transfer such unspent amount to a fund within a period of 6 months of the expiry of financial year. The auditor shall check whether the company has recorded a provision as per Ind AS 37 as at the balance sheet date in respect of unspent amount disclosed under contingent liability and commitments. Clause 20
तो
part.
ये आप देखेंगे कि इस बार जो शेड्यूल 3 में भी कुछ चेंजेस आए हैं, तो कंपनीज आर आल्सो रिक्वायर्ड टू मेक सर्टेन डिस्क्लोजर under in the financial statement as per Schedule 3 of the Companies Act, चाहे वो इंडेस रिलेटेड शेड्यूल डिवीजन 1 हो या डिवीजन 2 हो या डिवीजन 3, तो वहां पे भी CSR से रिलेटेड रिपोर्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट है। तो उसी रिपोर्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट को हमें यहाँ पे लिंक करते हुए एज एन ऑडिटर वी नीड टू आल्सो रिपोर्ट ओवर हियर whether the company has transferred any unspent amount to the fund specified in this particular schedule or not. So we need to also correlate it with that reporting requirement. तो बोर्ड को वहां पे भी रिपोर्ट करना है कंपनी को, और उसकी करस्पॉन्डिंग रिपोर्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट एज एन ऑडिटर आपकी यहाँ पर भी आएगी। यस।
Clause 20 Part B, amount unspent on ongoing projects, whether any amount remaining unspent under subsection 5 of section 135 of Companies Act pursuant to any ongoing project has been transferred to special account in compliance with the provisions of subsection 6 of section 135 of the said act. अगर कोई भी unspent amount है तो वो हमको यहाँ पे report करना है ongoing projects का। If the amount remaining unspent for 3 financial years, then the same is to be transferred to the fund under Schedule 7 within 30 days of the expiry of 3 years. The auditor shall check whether the company has recorded a provision as per Ind AS 37 in respect of unspent amount or disclosed under contingent liability and commitments. Now, clause 21. Qualifications or adverse remarks by the respective auditor in CARO report of group companies. Whether there has been any qualification or adverse remark by the respective auditors in the company's auditor's report order, report of companies included in consolidated financial statements. If yes, indicate the details of the companies and the paragraph numbers of the CARO report containing the qualifications or the adverse remark. अगर सब्सिडरी एसोसिएट या कोई भी ग्रुप कंपनी है उसकी रिपोर्ट में कोई भी रिमार्क है तो वी हैव टू रिपोर्ट इन द CARO. And the term qualification adverse remark used in this clause does not mean a qualification adverse opinion as the principle enunciated in SA 705. Only para number of CARO report containing qualifications or adverse remark to be reported, full text not to be reproduced. In case components audit report not issued till date of audit report, disclose the same fact. So we have to report accordingly in our CARO report. Thank you.
Yeah, so basically the last clause is related to the consolidated financial statement, और इसमें आपको कारो में पहले तो कुछ भी रिपोर्ट नहीं